Chapter 1065. Kuang Yi didn't expect Yang Chendong to be so smart and be able to see the crux of the problem at a glance. He nodded. Bugnam of Gojoseon is right. He only has military power and no financial power. Once he offends the emperor and cuts off his provisions, I'm afraid it will be difficult for him to command any army. What a wishful thinking. Yang Chendong exposed Zhu Qizhen's thoughts while chatting. Kuang Ye's face turned red again. Yang Chendong was speaking the truth. This time, Zhu Huihua was indeed deceived by Zhu Qizhen. Not explaining was equivalent to admitting it. Yang Chendong couldn't help but ask with interest, this explanation isn't very clever. If this prince can see it, others can also see it. Does the king of the 3 provinces not have any objections? Yes, but His Majesty allowed him to trade with the kingdom of Banga. Apart from handing over 30% of the profits to the imperial court, he could keep the rest for himself. Kuang Yi didn't hide any deep secrets either, so he spoke with a straight face. Trade with the Bengal army? Yang Chendong was a little surprised, but after thinking about it, he understood. Zhu Huihua had replaced his elder brother Zhu Huihua's position. If he still controlled the military and political power of the 3 provinces, it would be no different from the previous Little Southern Ming. This was something that Zhu Qizhen couldn't tolerate. It was because of this that both sides took a step back. One side wanted military power, while the other side wanted administrative and financial power. This was equivalent to each side taking what they needed. He sighed in his heart. It was a good plan. However, there was a prerequisite for all of this. For example, whether he agreed, whether Yang Xia agreed, and whether the 5-star army agreed. The 3 provinces were close to the Yunnan province. If they didn't deal with Yang Chendong, there wouldn't be peaceful days here. Needless to say, the Southern Ming Empire's food and the goods that the 3 provincial kings would trade with would have to rely on Yang Chendong. This was the main reason why they had sent Shen Tian and Kuang Yi to negotiate. Finally knowing the truth, Yang Chendong was no longer anxious. Now that it was someone else who needed his help, he could take his time to think about it. Therefore, he didn't take the initiative to ask questions and instead allowed Kuang Yi to speak. After seeing that Yang Chendong didn't have anything to ask, Kuang Yi opened his mouth as expected. The first thing that came out of his mouth was His Majesty's words, as if everything was His Majesty's will and he was just a messenger. If Yang Chendong had any opinions or questions, he would be responsible for conveying them, but he couldn't make the decision. It was no wonder that Kuang Yi was so careful. It was said that a weak country had no diplomacy. Besides, Yang Chendong was completely different from the one he met a few years ago. Now that the Southern Ming dynasty had a favor to ask of them, how could they not speak some soft words? Bugnam of Gojoseon, His Majesty said that as long as you agree to this decision, our Southern Ming Empire will publicly recognize your title as Bugnam of Gojoseon. This is a king with a different surname. Other than a few people who were conferred the title when Taizu was still alive, only King Shiping is left. This honor is so great and so high. Bugnam of Gojoseon, His Majesty also said that the Liangshan shelter is allowed to exist. As long as you don't steal or rob, and the people can enter the shelter, we will turn a blind eye and pretend that we didn't see anything. Bugnam of Gojoseon, His Majesty also said. Next, Kuang Yi represented Zhu Qizhen of the Ying sect and made promises again and again. Yang Chendong became a listener, but he just sat there and didn't say anything. After about half an hour, everything that needed to be said was said. Kuang Yi looked at Yang Chendong and asked in a low voice, Bugnam of Gojoseon, what do you think? This wasn't the first time he said this. It was enough to prove that Yang Chendong's position in Kuang Ye's heart was very important and high. However, Yang Chendong still didn't say anything, as if he was asleep. Under Kuang Ye's continuous questioning, Yang Chendong raised his head as if he had just woken up from a dream and said, this is far from enough. I'm afraid that Minister Qing still doesn't know that 2 or 3 days ago, the 5-star Army's 1st Cavalry Division was surrounded by Zhu Huilu, who killed many of our soldiers. If we don't take revenge, how can we convince the public? But at that time, the 3 provincial kings hadn't become part of the Southern Ming Empire. Now, he's already one of His Majesty's people. Kuang Yi wanted to explain more, but Yang Chendong said, yes, it's because I know that he's now one of the Southern Ming Empire's people that I didn't do anything to them. I just wanted to see what Minister Cheng would say. Now it seems that your sincerity is far from enough. Not enough? Kuang Yi understood the meaning behind his words. It wasn't that he couldn't, but that it wasn't enough. That meant that there was still room for discussion. He asked curiously, but does King Nanwu have any other requests? You can make the decision. No, I can pass on King Nanwu's request to His Majesty. At the same time, I will do my best to help. Kuang Yi didn't dare to say too much. All right, since Minister Cheng is so sincere, this prince might as well say a few things. Yang Chendong knew that the time was right. It was time for him to speak. He immediately mentioned that he was interested in the Southern Ming Empire's silk, tea leaves, and porcelain. He was interested in some masters and wanted to hire them to work in Crimson City at a high price. At the same time, he wanted to buy a certain percentage of the goods at cost price and then sell them to merchants from other countries under the name of Crimson City. It was said that Suhang's silk was of the best quality. Crimson City also spent some effort to imitate it, but unfortunately, the results weren't very good despite investing a lot of manpower and resources. For this, City Lord Yu Qian had represented the local factories to ask Yang Chendong more than once if they could bring in some talents to Crimson City. For this matter, the intelligence department had also tried, but the skilled workers were all restricted by the local masters. That place wasn't Yang Xie's territory, so it was very difficult to get all these people away without anyone noticing. This was a perfect opportunity to bring in talents while also dealing a blow to the Southern Ming Empire. Once the Southern Ming Empire lost the advantage of silk, porcelain, and tea leaves, Yang Xie would have a better chance of winning against the Southern Ming Empire. This matter needs to be reported to His Majesty before he can make a decision. Kuang Yi didn't immediately agree. Instead, he said that he needed to report it first. Yang Chendong could understand that Kuang Yi couldn't make a decision on such a big matter. Thus, he nodded in tacit agreement. Then, he raised a second request, which was to ask for people. This time, Zhu Huiyan attacked the shelter without any reason. Not only did thousands of soldiers die, but 40,000 civilians also ran away. This matter had to be mentioned. Thus, not only did the Southern Ming Empire have to admit it, they also had to compensate the 40,000 people. After hearing this, Kuang Yi frowned and said, okay, this old man will also report this matter to His Majesty. He didn't expect Zong to agree at all, but Yang Chendong still said it. He just wanted to give him a heads up. After all, Zhu Qizhen used to be great Ming Zong. Even if he agreed in his heart, he wouldn't say it out loud. After knowing this, Yang Chendong didn't place his hopes on the Southern Ming Empire. Instead, he placed it on Zhu Huiyan. Some things couldn't be handled by a county official. Yang Chendong then found the detained Chen Tian. Different from Kuang Yi, he maintained a serious gaze. He even called a few teachers in front of Kuang Yi and ordered them to prepare for battle. They were to leave Linshan City and head north at any time. Chen Tian didn't hide any of this from him. After the teachers left the hall, he naturally yelled, King Nanwu, what are you doing? Must you become enemies with our King Guangtong? Wrong, if it wasn't for this king becoming enemies with you, it was you who became enemies with us first. Yang Chendong turned around and angrily rebuked Chen Tian. Yes, we sent troops to attack your shelter first, but we didn't gain anything. Furthermore, even if we did something wrong, we can make up for it. Didn't I come this time to listen to your requests and conditions? What's the meaning of sending troops without talking about anything? Chen Tian yelled. It could be seen that he was truly anxious this time. It could be seen that not only him, but even his master, King Guangtong, didn't want to become enemies with the 5-star army again. Previously, Zhu Huiyan attacked the 5-star army because he wanted to use this method to show everyone his strength. Now, he had suffered losses against the 5-star army. He had even almost destroyed one of the enemy's cavalry divisions. However, to be able to make the 5-star army suffer losses like this was not something an ordinary person could do. Just from this point alone, Zhu Huiyan's goal had been achieved. He had also successfully received the Southern Ming Empire's amnesty. Since all of his goals had been achieved, there was naturally no need to continue fighting. If he won, no one would say anything, but if he lost, he would only feel bad. Zhu Huiyan knew this, so he sent the most eloquent person, Chen Tian, over. He only had one request, which was for the 5-star army to stop fighting. As for whether the other party would raise any requests or conditions, as long as they weren't too excessive, he would agree. After all, he wanted to step on the 5-star army to climb up. You said that we can talk. All right, then I'll give you a chance to talk. If you can't satisfy me, then there won't be a chance to talk. Yang Chendong spoke as if there was only one chance, and he wanted them to grasp it seriously. The 5 divisions and close to 100,000 soldiers finally arrived at Linshan City. At this point, Yang Chendong had over 100,000 soldiers. He indeed had the qualifications to cause a ruckus in the Southern Ming Empire's territory. However, these 100,000 soldiers didn't take a step forward, nor did they have any intentions of attacking. This was all because the negotiations were going smoothly. Chen Tian was very tactful. He clearly agreed to all of Yang Chendong's requests. However, this matter was very important, so he had to report it to Zhu Huiyan. Chapter 1066. Kuang Yi and Chen Tian both stayed in Linshan City. Only their trusted aides left the city to inform the higher-ups of Yang Chendong's request. Linshan City regained its usual peace. A few days later, news of the little Southern Ming Prince and Yangzhong Prince being captured in the Guizhou division was spread. At this point, the little Southern Ming army was disbanded. Under the leadership of General Meng Neng, their army joined the 3rd Province Prince Zhu Huizhou's army. Meng Neng brought over 300,000 troops. Adding on Zhu Huizhou's original army, even without the 100,000 from the Bangladesh army, he still had 500,000 troops. Young master, this. After Beta Persei received the news, he looked worriedly at Yang Chendong. What are you afraid of? 500,000 isn't a small number, but with 3 provinces, how many troops do you think he can transfer to Linshan City? Or how many troops would he need to deal with us? After Yang Chendong asked 2 questions in a row, he smiled and patted Beta Persei's shoulder. Don't worry, the plan won't change. Yang Chendong was indeed full of confidence. He predicted that Zhu Huizhou wouldn't make an enemy out of the 5-star army. After all, the time to prove his strength had passed. Now that he had been recruited as the 3rd Province Prince, there was no need to create more problems. If they really fought, Zhu Huizhou didn't have the confidence to win. Not to mention, there was one more thing that he didn't mention. Yao Yingjun had taken Zhu Lian and escaped from the Guizhou department. Not only that, they had also created an army of 50,000 people and were currently fighting for territory in the 3 provinces. Speaking of which, this was out of Yang Chendong's expectations. Yao Yingjun was a chess piece he placed in the little Southern Ming Prince's faction. Now that this faction was destroyed, he had completed his mission. Yao Yingjun thought the same. He even wanted to bring Princess Yingjun out and find a safe place in Yangxia so that she could live the rest of her life without worries. Who would have thought that at this time, a woman would actually show that she was not inferior to men? After learning that her second brother had betrayed her and her eldest brother and third brother had been captured, she actually took up the responsibility. Moreover, she really allowed him to persuade some of the small South Ming soldiers outside of the Guizhou division to rebuild the mountain. When this matter was reported to Yang Chendong through the intelligence network, he was also surprised for a while. Thinking about it, this was a good thing. He didn't have to pay a price to make his opponent restless, so why not? Yang Chendong agreed and sent someone to inform Yao Yingjun that if things did not go well, he could still bring Princess Yongxing to the Lang Shan shelter. At the same time, he also told him that if he needed financial support, he could ask. With all of this, Yang Chendong was sure that Zhu Huizhou, who seemed to be very powerful, would not make an enemy out of the 5-star army. Things developed as he expected. When the people sent by Chen Tian met with the three provincial kings and told them about Yang Chendong's request, the three provincial kings who tried to assassinate his brother quickly agreed to all of the conditions. Zhu Huizhou agreed to Yang Chendong's request and recognized the legitimacy of the shelter. As long as any Han citizen went there, regardless of their status, they wouldn't pursue the matter. Not only that, every year, he would provide 200,000 Han citizens to the shelter as compensation for attacking the five-star army. In exchange, Crimson City's goods could be provided to Zhu Huihua at the same price as other merchants. Originally, Yang Chendong wanted to provide 500,000 people a year, but Chen Tian refused. In his words, 200,000 was already a lot. At most, the three provinces wouldn't have enough Han citizens, and they could just grab some from the nearby southern Ming province. However, 500,000 a year, they wouldn't be able to catch that many. Actually, 200,000 a year was already enough to satisfy Yang Chendong. Originally, he was just asking for an exorbitant price, waiting for the other party to bargain. Giving 30 to 50,000 people a year was already what he had expected. Now, 200,000 a year was already a pleasant surprise. Not long after, the southern Ming Emperor Zhu Qizhen also agreed. After discussing with the court officials, they finally agreed to sell the silk, tea leaves, and porcelain to the five-star army. This was something that couldn't be helped. Many areas in the south of the southern Ming Empire had already been occupied by the five-star army. If they didn't agree, they wouldn't be able to sell these things for money. As for those skilled workers, since when did the great Ming Empire value craftsmen? If they were gone, they could just nurture them again. Thus, they all agreed. The negotiations with the two sides went very smoothly, reaching Yang Chendong's expectations. After the negotiations were completed, Yang Chendong knew that he had to leave this place. Even Linchin City and Siming residence had to be given up. These were the bargaining chips in the negotiations. Retreat. Since he had achieved his goal, Yang Chendong gave the order to retreat. Hundreds of thousands of five-star army escorted the 40,000 prisoners out of Linchin City. At this time, the battle ended and everything returned to normal. However, any smart person could tell that this wasn't the end. Once the two sides started fighting again, they wouldn't stop until one side was dead. The five-star army finally retreated, leaving behind Linchin City and Siming residence. At the same time, Zhu Huiying also left behind two opponents, Everlasting Victory Princess and Shiping King's army. Everlasting Victory Princess didn't need to be mentioned. When Zhu Huiying made his move, he didn't plan to let this sister go. As for Shiping King, he was originally the king of Yunnan. Now that the three provincial kings wanted to replace him, how could he agree? Of course, he had to find some trouble. Zhu Qizhen didn't think highly of the three provincial kings, but he had to agree to reduce internal friction. Now that Shiping King was willing to fight with Zhu Huiying, he was happy to see it happen. He didn't say anything and just let them fight. After Yang Chendong left southern Ming's territory, he didn't pay attention to it anymore. Yang Xie's territory was so big that there were too many things for him to worry about. For example, there was a piece of information in front of him about the Bai Ming army. The telegram was sent by the commander of the First Army, Tiger's Man. It only said one thing. The Bai Ming army had a 50,000-man cavalry. They were all soldiers from the Liaodong region and were nicknamed the Liaodong Iron Cavalry. Under the leadership of General Fang Dingshan, they were training in the grasslands. They constantly clashed with the small Mongolian tribes and sometimes provoked Yeshen and Walla. They won and lost. According to Tiger's Man's telegram, the 50,000-man Liaodong Iron Cavalry followed the policy of training soldiers through battles. Fang Dingshan used to be the commander of Zhu Qiyu's imperial bodyguards. He was quite trusted and was given a lot of freedom on this expedition. Since their appearance, the Bai Ming army's banner became famous in the grasslands and had a certain amount of influence. They're all restless people. Yang Chendong sighed and then looked at another telegram. It was sent by the Internal Intelligence Department of the Japanese Empire. The internal strife there had already begun, and some places had already broken out of the control of the emperor and the great general's office. In other words, it wouldn't be long before the Japanese Empire's affairs had to be resolved. Thinking about Princess Junko, who had returned more than a year ago, Yang Chendong looked in the direction of the Japanese Empire and said to himself, "Don't let anything happen to you. Otherwise, a lot of people will be buried with you." January 1457 AD. Yang Chendong returned to Qiqian City and prepared to spend the new year here. At the same time, he accompanied his wife, Hu Yan, to wait for her delivery. On the 7th day of the second lunar month, on this seemingly ordinary day, a baby boy was born. When Yang Chendong was 20 years old, he finally had his first son, named Yang Bo Bugnam of Gojoseon finally had a son, and there was someone to inherit the family name. Naturally, it was a great day for the entire Yangtze. Qiqian City was immediately decorated, and it was even more lively than the New Year. The various provinces and regions under the Yang faction also sent representatives to the city with gifts to celebrate and express their joy. Good things come in pairs. On the third day after Yang Bo was born, King Abu Burkle of the Great F country announced his surrender in Cotton Orchid Island. After more than half a year of siege, the city was already in chaos. Originally, Abu Burkle wanted to continue supporting because he still had soldiers and food in his hands. However, the people had already had enough of these days of fear. Under the instigation of the intelligence department in the city, they rushed into the city and surrounded the palace. The power of the people was great, especially when it came to their own safety. Often, they could exert unimaginable power. Facing the flood of people, the soldiers of the Great F country did not stop them. In the end, Abu Burkle was captured. The city gate was opened and he was sent to the cold front navy that surrounded the city. With the capture of Abu Burkle, the fall of the Great F country was announced, and the entire Luzon island was unified. At this point, the Great F country and the original Sulu country were all under Yangtze's control. Yangtze also gained more than 6 million people, and its strength increased by a large margin. In more than a year, Siam and the Great F country were divided. With more than 10 million people, Yangtze's strength was evident. However, this time, Yang Chendong only moved the 6 million people in Siam's current Thai province. Half of the 3 million people were moved to other provinces. The 6 million people in Luzon Island were not moved. They were reserved for the next move to the Japanese Empire. At that time, 5 million people would be sent to the Japanese Empire. Yes, Yang Chendong had raised his butcher's knife. The next target of his plan was the Japanese Empire. The reason why he said it was a plan was because Yang Chendong could not guarantee that there would not be other accidents. For example, the sudden appearance of the 50,000 Liaodong Iron Cavalry in Baiming was an accident. According to the report of the new army commander, Tiger's Mane, this iron cavalry was very arrogant on the grassland. Not only did they have the opportunity to clash with the Walla Iron Cavalry, but they also occasionally encountered caravans that traded with the first city. Although they could not kill and rob, they still had to pay for the passage. Chapter 1067. Perhaps it was because the Liaodong Iron Cavalry was short of money, or perhaps they didn't want to provoke a powerful existence like the 5-star army right away. But even if they didn't kill anyone, they just wanted money, which made some caravans that cooperated with the first city suffer. During this time, many merchants came to the door and complained to Tiger's Man. According to them, they would rather give the money to the 5-star army than to the Liaodong Iron Cavalry. The appearance of the Liaodong Iron Cavalry greatly changed many people's view of Baiming. Is this still the army of the Great Ming Dynasty? Why are they so barbaric? How are they different from the bandits on the grassland? Are they still the grass-eating Han Chinese? Previously, there was the 5-star army, and now there was Baiming's Liaodong Iron Cavalry. What changed them? For this matter, Tiger's Man sent a telegram to Yang Chendong more than once, asking if he wanted to attack them. After all, one mountain couldn't accommodate 2 tigers. It was enough to have the 5-star army on the grassland. Yang Chendong suppressed Tiger's Man's intention to attack. He now had a target to conquer, the Japanese Empire. This was a country with a population of more than 10 million people. If he wanted to conquer them, the preparation work must be very thorough. The people of the Japanese Empire were very fertile. This could be seen from their names, such as Dairo, Ero, Saburo. There were even 7 and 8 Dairo. This might have something to do with the environment they lived in and their development over the years. It was very easy for each region to be independent. Sometimes, even 2 counties that were very close to each other would see each other as fire and water and would fight with each other. At that time, whoever had more people would often have the advantage. For a country with such a large population, Yang Chendong must be well prepared. He couldn't afford to be distracted. Not to mention that in his heart, it was difficult to divide the world into 2 for a long time, and the tripartite balance was the most stable. The existence of Beiming, Southern Ming, and himself was the tripartite balance, which could ensure that any side would have to be wary of the other side when they attacked. While rejecting Tiger's man's idea of attacking on the grassland, he also asked him to prepare the new army that had been formed for a year to be transferred to North Korea. In addition to preparing for an attack on the Japanese Empire, Yang Chendong also called the city Lord Yu Qian and other important people in the palace to discuss the introduction of paper money. The introduction of paper money was not Yang Chendong's creation. At the beginning of the Ming dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang implemented the paper money policy and issued the Ming dynasty's precious banknotes and copper coins. However, the Great Ming dynasty's banknotes did not have a limit and there was no reserve, which quickly led to inflation. Now, the Great Ming dynasty's banknotes were restricted in the market. Although they were still circulating, their purchasing power was very limited. Especially after the sudden rise of Yang Chendong, regardless of whether it was the Northern Ming or the Southern Ming, in order to achieve their goals, they vigorously printed the Great Ming banknote, which directly caused the market to become chaotic. At the same time, this item depreciated even more, and there were very few people who recognized it. With this example, Yang Chendong obviously wouldn't let the same mistake happen to him. This time, not only did he want the paper money to be successful, but it also had to be strong for a long time. For this, he ordered people to vigorously develop the gold mines found on the island of Dufei as reserves. He was preparing to introduce the paper money into the market. First, it has to be anti-counterfeiting. Second, it has to be advertised properly. Third, and most important, is that it can't be casually published. The amount of reserves can only be printed to achieve the same value as gold and silver, Yang Chendong said to City Lord Yu Qian and the people in charge of the Yang family's bank with a serious expression. After all, the circulation of gold and silver was a bit too costly. In the long run, the people who would suffer losses would be the country and the people. It could be said that the paper money was a very necessary thing. After handing over the issue of the paper money to professionals, Yang Chendong started to mobilize the troops. This time, he was preparing to deal with the Japanese Empire. He was preparing to bring 150,000 soldiers. This could be said to be the largest number of soldiers he had ever brought. Among them, the 1st Cavalry Division was already making preparations to be mobilized. There was also the 1st Cavalry Division that must be brought along. This was a very elite force. With them, many things would be done with half the effort. Then there was the C-4th Division, the C-5th Division, the 1st Reserve Division, the 1st Division, the 2nd Division, and the 3rd Division. In total, there were close to 150,000 people. Not only were the troops ready to assemble in North Korea, Yang Chendong was also preparing 6 million people to go to the Japanese Empire. For example, Luzon Island had to prepare 5 million people, and even the provinces and regions had to prepare 1 million people. This was the preparation to uproot the entire country. At the same time, Yang Chendong took the opportunity to inspect some of the important industries in Chichen City. Yang Chendong paid special attention to the munitions factory. 2 years ago, he had brought out a Type 99 tank from the warehouse and placed it in the factory. Now that so much time had passed, he wanted to know how the imitation work was going. Imitation was one of Yang Xie's main policies for industrial development. First, there would be a finished product and a method. Then, he would try to learn how to do it. Only then would he be able to walk his own path. It was just like how many products and firearms were made. The Han people, who had 5,000 years of history, had never lacked intelligent people. However, this time, Yang Chendong was somewhat disappointed. There was simply too much information and knowledge involved in the creation of a tank. Even though there was already a finished product in front of everyone, they had never seen how it was used. Under the circumstances of how it was used, there was no way to imitate it even if they wanted to. Therefore, this time, Yang Chendong came to the munitions factory to demonstrate how to use the tank. Clear the area. Except for the necessary relevant researchers and the main leaders of the munitions factory, everyone else was cleared out of the area. Then, Yang Chendong walked into the big, iron tool, with a tank hat on his head. Under everyone's gaze, the tank that was filled with fuel started moving. With a roar, it walked out of the secret workshop and appeared in the empty field. This scene was too much of a shock to everyone. The roaring sound had already frightened everyone. When they saw that this thing could already move under the control of a single person, everyone present widened their eyes and looked like they had been shocked silly. Then, an even more shocking scene appeared. After the tank arrived at the field, it first moved quickly and skillfully turned. Along the way, it knocked down many obstacles that had been prepared beforehand. Then, it stood still and fired at an area that had been marked out long ago. In the roar of the explosion, the target area a few miles away was hit, and smoke rose from it. Plop! This eye-popping scene attracted everyone present to kneel. Even the city lord Yu Qian, who accompanied Yang Chendong to watch, and Yang Heir, who had been following Yang Chendong for many years and had long been accustomed to various miracles, also knelt on the ground. Yang Chendong was very powerful. He was once called the Lord God, as if he was a god that had descended to earth. But even if they were fully prepared, the moment they saw the shell fired, everyone was still shocked and knelt on the ground. They didn't dare to imagine. If this iron tool were to be used on a large scale, once it appeared on the battlefield, who would have the ability to stop it? They were afraid that when the time came, it would only be a rush, and the thousands of soldiers and horses would be scared silly and scattered. When everyone knelt on the ground, the tank extinguished the fire and stopped. Yang Chendong, with a tank hat on his head, got out of the cockpit. His appearance here attracted loud shouts that shook the heavens and the earth. If one listened carefully, they would hear the three lords of God talking non-stop. Well, this thing is somewhat magical, but it's more of a function of technology. So, you choose 2 people, and I'll teach them how to drive and operate it. When Yang Chendong's voice resounded in the training ground, for these 2 places, the people below could be said to be red in the face and ears. They all wanted to feel the power of this iron tool, and they all wanted to be in close contact with the divine object. For a full 10 days, except for going back to the palace to visit his son and daughter at night, Yang Chendong stayed in the training ground most of the time. And this place had been taken over by Long Wei. No one was allowed to approach without orders, or they had the right to act first and report later. It was precisely because they had seen the power of the tank that Long Wei believed that any level of defense was appropriate. In 10 days, the 2 disciples taught by Yang Chendong had barely finished their apprenticeship. Next, they could only rely on continuous practice to reach the level of familiarity. After that, Yang Chendong left the training ground and returned to the palace. There was news from the Japanese Empire that internal strife had begun, and now it was already April 1457. Back to half a month ago, in the Japanese Empire's capital, Ping and Beijing. Princess Junko, who had returned to the Japanese Empire for 2 years, made use of her strengths and established a school called Jianghu Academy. She widely accepted students and taught advanced knowledge, which was constantly expanding its influence. When Jianghu Academy was first established, it didn't attract much attention. On the contrary, it attracted people's ridicule. In the Japanese Empire, the status of women was naturally subordinate to men. They often believed more than China that a woman without talent was virtuous. It was not surprising that Junko was a princess. Fortunately, Junko's actions received the support of the emperor, who was also his father, the Garden Emperor. There was no other way. His son, Chenin, was only 15 years old, and Junko, who was already 20 years old, naturally became the person that the emperor valued. Speaking of which, the emperor only had a good name, but his life was not easy. In the history of the Japanese Empire, since the end of the Heian period, the emperor, who originally had absolute control over the Japanese Empire, began to lose his power. In 1192 AD, Minamoto no Yoritomo established the Kamakura shogunate, and the emperor began to fall and became a puppet of the Kamakura shogunate. Later in history, the emperor became a puppet of the Muromachi shogunate. The emperor became a puppet of the shogunate for more than 600 years. Not only did he not have any real power, but sometimes even his basic necessities, such as food, shelter, and transportation, and holding ceremonies, had problems due to financial constraints. The most typical example was the 103rd generation Emperor Hotta Miyamoto. He was Junko's younger brother. Chapter 1068. Emperor Hotta was born in 1442 AD. His name was Qingren, and he was the eldest son of the 102nd emperor of the Chrysanthemum dynasty. His mother was the queen of the emperor of the Chrysanthemum dynasty, Fujiwara. When Emperor Hotta was born, the situation of the imperial court in Kyoto was terrible. First, the real power was in the hands of the Shitachi shogunate, and the emperor was a puppet. Second, the national treasury could not make ends meet, and it was not even enough to pay the salaries of the imperial court officials, let alone meet the expenses of the imperial court. Therefore, even though Emperor Hotta was born in the imperial court, he sometimes did not even have enough food and clothing. Even the wedding ceremony of marrying Princess Tingtian was held hastily. In history, the emperor of the Chrysanthemum dynasty abdicated and became the supreme emperor. The 22-year-old Emperor Hotta inherited the throne and became the 103rd emperor of the Chrysanthemum dynasty. Princess Tingtian then became the empress. However, due to the tight financial situation, the imperial court in Kyoto held a very shabby ceremony to save money. Even after he died, because he did not have the money to bury him, his corpse was frozen in the imperial palace for 2 months. Some officials had to raise money to bury him. From this situation, one could imagine the status of the emperor. This was the main reason why they were willing to spend a lot of money to buy the cannons from the 5-star army. It was because the military and political power was controlled by General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. If he did not die, the imperial family would never be able to rise up. However, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's whereabouts were uncertain. No one knew when he went in and out of the general's house. The emperor only bought 1 cannon and 2 bullets from the 5-star army, so he did not dare to take the risk. Since his daughter was willing to come out and do something, the emperor would definitely support her. It was this Jinshin Academy that no one thought highly of. After 2 years of development, they could not recruit any students, but now, there were people who were willing to take the initiative to learn. They could not satisfy the 50 students they taught at one time, which attracted the attention of other forces. General Ashikaga Yoshimasa was one of them. First, he sent people to catch the former student. After some investigation, he found that the former student was extraordinarily talented. However, he was just the most ordinary student in the first batch of students in Jinshin Academy, but he had such a great change, which attracted the attention of the general. Since she is capable, beautiful, and a princess, then let's marry her. General Ashikaga Yoshimasa said to his subordinates. Soon, the news that the general wanted to marry Princess Junko spread among the higher-ups. Some abilities should be used, this was the attitude of the strong to the weak. Maybe he wanted Junko to work for him, or maybe he just wanted to marry Junko and throw her at home as a concubine and live a peaceful life. But no matter what the result was, the emperor's power of the emperor. Of course, Junko wouldn't agree to it. She went to the emperor and expressed her determination that she would rather die. How could the emperor did not know his daughters? But what could he? Him? He didn't have much military power, and he didn't have any political partners. He couldn't win. Just when the emperor was at his wit's end and Junko was about to commit suicide, a savior appeared. Oda Nagamasa was a powerful general in the capital of Ping'an. He was also the only collaborator that the emperor had managed to rope in over the years. He proposed that he could agree to the supreme general's request, but before the wedding, he wanted to meet the Supreme General to discuss some details. The location of the meeting was set at the Supreme General's mansion. The military system of the Japanese Empire was divided from the bottom to the top. It was divided into soldiers, infantry captains, in charge of 100 people, infantry captains, in charge of 500 people, elders, in charge of 1,000 people, generals, in charge of 2,000 people, magistrates, in charge of 10,000 people, chiefs, in charge of 20,000 people, daimyo, in charge of 50,000 people, generals, in charge of 60,000 to 80,000 people, generals, in charge of 60,000 to 80,000 people, and the emperor at the top. Oda Nagamasa was one of the generals with real power under General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He had more than 70,000 soldiers. He came up with this idea to kill the general and replace him. Before, he couldn't find a chance to attack Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Why not use this opportunity to trick him into coming to the general's mansion and then kill him in one fell swoop? In this way, Oda Nagamasa could replace him, and the emperor's power could be restored to a certain extent. This idea was quickly supported by the emperor and Princess Junko. This was their reply to the great general, and the great general agreed without hesitation. There had been news about the imperial family purchasing a cannon from the Five Stars Palace. But after so many years, there was no news about it, and it gradually faded away. Even General Ashikaga Yoshimasa thought it was fake news. It was precisely because of this that the general politely agreed. He thought that the royal family wanted to save face, so he would give them face. In the future, when Junko became his woman, wouldn't he be able to bully her however he wanted? With a good start, the plan was carried out smoothly. The day before the agreed meeting, the Type 59-1 130mm cannon that he had spent 10 million taels of silver to buy finally took off its disguise after being covered in dust for many years. Furthermore, the only 2 cannonballs were also taken out. In order to ensure that nothing would go wrong, after the first shot was fired, the second shot had to be promptly followed up. The 5-star army had already adjusted the target, and the target was the general's mansion. No one dared to touch it in these years, and now it was finally the time to use it. This matter made the emperor, Junko, and Oda Nagamasa become very excited. After a long night of waiting, dawn finally came. When the time of the meeting was getting closer and closer, the emperor and the others held their breath. They were about to witness a miracle, a scene that changed history. At 9:00 in the morning, the 2 sides agreed to meet at the general's mansion. The shell was put into the Type 59-1 130mm cannon, and then a deafening sound was heard. The shell arc across the sky went straight into the general's mansion, causing a shocking feeling like an earthquake. It hit. The soldiers of the Japanese Empire who fired the cannon shouted excitedly. "Isn't there still one more shell? Fire it again." General Oda Nagamasa said excitedly. He was afraid that Ashikaga Yoshimasa wouldn't die. He didn't believe that the general wouldn't die after firing 2 shells. Under the attack of the 2 powerful cannons, the entire general's mansion was covered. Even if the area of the mansion was not small, more than 70% of the area was killed. Especially the main building was destroyed. As long as Ashikaga Yoshimasa stayed in the general's mansion, his fate was almost set in stone. In the imperial palace, you could even see the fire and smoke coming from the general's mansion. This scene made the emperor, Junko, and Oda Nagamasa very excited. They were shocked by the power of the cannons, and they were also excited that the situation in the Japanese Empire would soon change. The situation had indeed changed, but the general Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't die. It wasn't because he was smart enough to see through everything. The problem lay with Oda Nagamasa. His most trusted deputy, Kayome Sakuki, suddenly betrayed him and told the supreme shogun about the plan. At the last moment, they escaped from the mansion and avoided a fatal disaster. When Oda Nagamasa heard the news, he saw the general's army outside the imperial palace. Fortunately, in order to celebrate the victory and successfully seize military power, Oda Nagamasa had transferred tens of thousands of his own soldiers to guard the palace. Now, they were finally put to good use. Hold on. At the same time, Oda Nagamasa was also preparing to break out of the imperial palace. In his view, even if Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't die, Ping and Beijing wasn't a place where he could live for a long time. As for whether he needed to take the emperor and his family with him when he left. Don't be ridiculous, it was already difficult to protect himself, who would think about other things? Oda Nagamasa wanted to escape. Once he left, it could be imagined that the Supreme General's anger would definitely be vented on the emperor. If that was the case, although they might not die, it would be far worse and more painful than death. So, leaving the imperial palace was a must. General Oda, please take us with you. The emperor didn't care about his face and lowered his noble head. Yes. Oda Nagamasa wanted to refuse. But Princess Junko said, General, I have a very good relationship with the leader of the 5-star army. As long as you can take us away, I will send someone to contact them and ask for their support to deal with Ashikaga Yoshimasa. By the way, the leader is my teacher. As if she was afraid that Oda Nagamasa would refuse, Junko added a master and apprentice as a bargaining chip. Everyone in the Japanese Empire knew that the Han people attached great importance to the relationship between master and apprentice. This sentence made Oda Nagamasa, who was about to refuse, change his attitude. He could indeed escape and even take the emperor's family with him. However, if he did so, he would only draw the great general's anger onto himself. With his 70,000 soldiers, there was no way he could stop the great general. So, he wanted to keep the emperor and his family to attract the general's attention and anger. But at the same time, he knew even more clearly that even if he managed to escape this time, it would be impossible for him to regain his power. It was even very likely that he would become an existence that everyone wanted to kill. He had no idea how long he could last. But now it was completely different. If he could get the help of the 5-star army, the situation would be reversed. If you don't believe it, just look at the power of the 2 cannons. Oda Nagamasa's eyes rolled for a moment. He originally wanted to say sorry, but now he said, yes, the emperor's safety is more important than anything else. I will take you away. Chapter 1069. Later, when the great general's soldiers entered the palace, they had already disappeared. Only the 59 to 130 mm cannon that was still a little warm could be seen at the back of the palace. Take care of this thing, this is the evidence that the 5-star army wants to persecute this great general. I will go back and ask them for an explanation. Great General Ashikaga Yoshimasa's face flashed with anger. There were often ships of the 5-star army near the Wa Island. Usually, they also exchanged business, so their relationship was quite good. But this time, they wanted to use other people's hands to take his life. This was something he couldn't tolerate. He decided to take advantage of this matter and blackmail the 5-star army. It was clear that the navy of the Japanese Empire also had some strength. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was obviously too arrogant. He thought that the 5-star army would be afraid of him. But he didn't know that at this moment, the 5-star army was mobilizing. The source of all the information came from the head of the security bureau in the Japanese Empire. He said that a civil war was imminent and that they should be prepared. Before the new year, Yang Chendong received the information that the internal relations of the Japanese Empire were tense, and some places had already had internal strife. Since then, he had been making all kinds of preparations. Yang Xie's powerful machine began to move, the soldiers, provisions, and people who wanted to migrate were all moving. Now that there was finally definite news, how could he let go of such an opportunity? Although Yang Chendong didn't know if the emperor's faction would kill the general the day before, in his opinion, no matter who won or lost, it would be beneficial to him. This was a move he was going to make. Ashikaga Yoshimasa took the emperor and some of his confidants and left Ping in Beijing. As he wished, Junko sent her trusted Kobayashi, who was her bodyguard when she was in the Great Ming Dynasty. She asked him to leave the army and get a ship to the nearby North Korea to report to the 5-star army for help. After doing this, she followed her imperial father, the empress, her younger brother, and other members of the imperial family to the south under the protection of Oda Nagamasa, and entered the Shanin Road's Anyan area. Shaolin found a boat by the sea and came to North Korea. It was already more than 10 days later when he reported to Yang Chendong. Holding the telegram from North Korea in his hand, he didn't look too surprised. However, the cannon did not kill Ashikaga Yoshimasa. This would make it more difficult for him to conquer the Japanese Empire. Fortunately, he had never thought that such a powerful figure would die so easily, so he had already made sufficient preparations. Yang Chendong put the telegram aside and gave the order to Beta Persei, who was following beside him, order Longwei to get ready to depart. We'll sail to Korea in 2 days. With horses, they were called Haiki, and without horses, they were called Longwei. This was an extremely elite, well-equipped, and particularly combat-capable army. They were also the strongest protection around Yang Chendong. Often, wherever they appeared, it meant that Yang Chendong would also appear there. There were only 2 days to prepare, but for an elite army, the time was more than enough. The reason why Yang Chendong left 2 days to make arrangements was that he wanted to take a good look at his son and daughter. His son Yang Bo was still too young. Instead of looking at him, it was better to look at his mother, Hu Yan. He talked about his next itinerary and apologized. As the first madam and Yang Chendong's legal wife, Hu Yan was originally a kind and virtuous woman. Although she was very worried, she didn't blame him at all. Instead, she advised Yang Chendong to be careful. She also said that the next time he came back, little Bo should be able to run all over the place. After leaving Hu Yan's palace, Yang Chendong went to see his daughter, Lele. In contrast, she was much cuter. As soon as she saw Yang Chendong, she hugged his neck like a wombat and didn't want to come down. She kept calling him father. Yang Chendong also liked Lele very much. He even specially created a song for her, "The king brought me to patrol the mountains," saying that she was his little princess. Logically speaking, with his current status, it was really degrading for him to touch and play with these songs. But when did he ever put these customs in his eyes? Just based on this matter, it attracted the envy of many people. The attitude of the servants in the palace towards Lele became more friendly and respectful. Yang Xia also had many similarities with other dynasties. For example, the people below were also very understanding. Whoever was favored would be more popular. Fortunately, Yang Chendong also treated the other madams very well. At least, he did his best to treat them equally. In addition, Hu Yan, as the legal wife of the princess consort, had no intention of suppressing any of her younger sisters. This allowed the palace to appear to be harmonious. Even if there were some disputes, no one would show it on the surface. Whether the backyard was stable or not was directly related to the situation on the front line. Seeing that the backyard was fine, 2 days later, Yang Chendong took the last 1,000 Longwei to leave on the transport ship and went straight to North Korea. At this time, the Japanese Empire had already started a war, especially in the Anyan area. The army sent by the great general Ashikaga Yoshimasa had already fought with Oda Nagamasa's army. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's reason was dignified. He said that someone had kidnapped the royal family, and he came to rescue them. Oda Nagamasa was also not incompetent. He held the emperor hostage and ordered his vassals. He said that someone wanted to rebel, and he was protecting the emperor. He also asked others to do the same as him, to make their own efforts and contributions to protect the royal family and the emperor. Everyone said that they were right, and everyone said that they were righteous. The two groups of people fought together. The other forces of the Japanese Empire that received the news didn't intervene. If they rashly acted without seeing the result, it was very likely that they would become cannon fodder. No one who could become the leader of a force was a fool. When Yang Chendong arrived in North Korea nearly 20 days later, the situation in the Japanese Empire was already very critical. From the feedback of the intelligence department, it was obvious that the great general's side had the advantage. He had always been in charge of the military and political power of the whole country. Oda Nagamasa was just one of the vassals. Naturally, their strength was not equal. It seemed that he couldn't hold on any longer. The governor of North Korea province, Zhang Yi, had already done the logistics work for the army. Some of the people who came here first were also properly settled by him. When the 5-star army entered the territory of the Japanese Empire and stood firm, he would immediately send people to make sure that they occupied a place. This was to ensure that they didn't go back and forth and didn't cause extra trouble for the army. Yang Qindong praised Governor Zhang Ye's work. Then he called a group of military generals and pointed at Tsushima Island in the Japanese Empire's terrain on the sand table. He said, "This will be our primary target. Commander Su, I will give this task to your army. Is there any problem?" "I promise to complete the task." The new army's commander, Su He, stood at attention and replied confidently. The new army was an army that had just been established. However, it had been more than a year since the establishment of the army. The personnel structure was already very complete. Especially the commander, Su He, who was originally a general. Since he was captured by Yang Qindong, he had repeatedly made contributions to the army. Under the leadership of such a strong general, the combat power of the new army had been constantly improving. What they lacked now was actual combat experience. It was because of this that Yang Qindong transferred the new army to the front line this time. It was to give them a good opportunity to fight. In Yang Qindong's eyes, the Japanese Empire was not worthy of being called a big enemy. His real enemy was still the grassland. Su He took the position of the vanguard, which made the other division commanders envious. However, they were just envious. No one dared to disobey the orders of the 6th young master. Besides, the Japanese Empire was also one of the big countries. If they wanted to completely occupy this place, they would have to fight a lot of battles. Everyone was ready to fight. After the order was issued, 2 hours after the meeting, a large number of ships belonging to the 5-star army began to set off. They set off from Pusan, the southernmost part of North Korea, and went straight to Tsushima Island, which was hundreds of nautical miles away. Tsushima Island belonged to the West Hokkaido area of the Japanese Empire. The chief in charge of guarding this place was called Fukushima Nagashi. He had 20,000 soldiers and nearly 100 warships in his hands. It was a well-known force. Because they fought by the sea all year round, this army was very mobile. If they couldn't win, they could just board the ship and escape to the sea. With this, even the orders of the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa were not completely effective here. Fukushima Nagashi was also paying attention to the Battle of Anyun, but in his view, it was just an internal strife for benefits. To put it bluntly, it was a dog-eat-dog fight. No matter who won in the end, it had nothing to do with him. So during this period of time, his days were very leisurely, and he was just a good spectator watching the show. Suddenly, one day, a large number of naval forces flying the flag of the 5-star army appeared around Tsushima Island. As soon as they appeared, they surrounded the island in all directions, not leaving a single gap. This situation really scared the Fukushima chief, who had been on the battlefield for a long time. The ones surrounding the island were the C4 and C5 divisions responsible for transporting the new army soldiers. In their eyes, their navy would play a big role in attacking the Japanese Empire. Just like now, no matter who was the vanguard, in the end, the navy would be the first to act. Fire the cannons. The 2 Cold Front Division commanders gave the order almost at the same time. Hundreds of cannons installed in the ships were fired at the Japanese Empire's ships. There were less than 100 ships, facing the attack of 2 elite Cold Front Division commanders. There was no way they could resist. As the ships of the Japanese Empire were sunk or hit, the remaining ships of the Japanese Empire quickly retreated, heading towards the depths of Tsushima Island. It's up to our new army now. Pass down the order, prepare to land. Su He said excitedly. He was afraid that the 2 Cold Front Division commanders would fire directly into the depths of Tsushima Island. If that happened, he wouldn't live up to his name as the vanguard. Fortunately, these people knew how to endure, and gave him the opportunity to attack. Chapter 1070. Speaking of which, why wouldn't the 2 commanders of the Cold Front Division want to take down Tsushima Island directly? They also have the strength to do so. However, if the cannons were to fire, they would inevitably kill more people of the Japanese Empire. It wasn't that they couldn't bear to do so. This could be seen from the attitude of the sixth young master towards this place. It seemed like the sixth young master had some resentment towards this place. The reason why they didn't fire the cannons was because they wanted to give the new army a chance to train their soldiers. At the same time, they could also save some cannons. After all, every cannons fired were worth a lot of money. So far, the production rate of cannons was still very low. Moreover, from time to time, substandard products would appear. Cannons had become a very precious item in the army. The soldiers of the new army couldn't wait any longer. As soon as the ship docked, they rushed towards the island like madmen. After losing the ship, Fukushima Nagamasa's combat strength had decreased by more than half. Quick, release the smoke, call for reinforcements. Fukushima Nagamasa, who was forced to retreat back to the island, heard from his subordinates that countless five-star troops had already begun to disembark and fight. Immediately, he was scared out of his wits and screamed in horror. Calling for reinforcements was something he learned from Wuxia. At the time when there was no telecommunications, this method was still somewhat effective. At least, it notified others that there was a foreign invasion on Tsushima Island. However, it was a pity that the five-star army had been planning for a long time. How could they give them any time to breathe? He and his comrades didn't know how many times they had dreamt that they would appear in the Japanese Empire and start a massacre. Now, their dreams had finally come true. Yang Chendong's order was to show no mercy. Anyone who resisted would be killed without mercy. It's just a small island nation. How dare they overestimate themselves and spy on Wuxia? How dare they try to swallow an elephant? Now was the time to deal with them. There was no need to be soft-hearted or have any scruples. This was because he was giving them a taste of their own medicine. Moreover, he was paying them back 100 times. The new army entered Tsushima Island in a mighty manner. The 4 cavalry divisions mounted their horses and launched a fierce attack. In front of Fukushima Nagashi's army, which did not possess any firearms, not even the most primitive firearms, the appearance of more than 30,000 cavalrymen was like a tide of beasts, instantly drowning them. The frontmost Japanese army was forced to retreat, suffering heavy casualties. Cavalry had a natural advantage over infantrymen. They were both using cold weapons, but they were destined not to be opponents of the same level. There would only be one result in this clash. The cavalry would slaughter in all directions, and the infantry would be defeated like a mountain. It was the first time for many of the new army soldiers to go to the battlefield, but each of them had undergone at least half a year of hard training before coming here. They had long memorized the things that they should pay attention to. Right now, they were just performing at the level that they had been training for. Facing the Japanese army that had no fighting spirit and only knew how to continuously retreat, even if they were a little flustered, they quickly got used to it. After all, it was the easiest to fight a battle where the wind was blowing. This was the reason why Yang Chendong sent the new army for the first battle. In contrast, the new army had the least amount of combat experience among the 150,000 soldiers he brought with him. This was a chance for them to make up for their shortcomings. It was true that the new army was a new army, but their combat strength was not the weakest. They had been training for a long time, and each soldier carried the hope and future of their family. Compared to the Yishi, and Yishi, their fighting spirit was much stronger. After the victory of the first battle, the new army's morale was high. They lined up on the island and waited for Yang Chendong to inspect them. It was said that morale was built through fighting. The situation on the battlefield was one-sided. The new Third Army had only won a big victory, but it was as if they had been reborn. Many of the new soldiers had successfully accepted the baptism of the battlefield and completed the transformation from new soldiers to veterans. The opponent in this battle was only 20,000 people, and they were not well prepared. Victory is deserved. This was the first sentence that Commander Su said after seeing Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong nodded approvingly and said, "Very good. Since that's the case, I'll give you another chance to perform." Next, the new Third Army will cooperate with the other divisions to take down all the territories of the West Sea Road. Are you confident? Yes. He just answered instinctively, but then he realized what Yang Chendong meant. He couldn't help but widen his eyes and said, "Don't we have to go to the Onion area first? Princess Junko and the Emperor of the Japanese Empire are there." The Onion area was in the Shanin area. From Tsushima Island, they needed to go north. The West Sea Road was in the east of Tsushima Island. This was a completely different direction. It was no wonder that he was so surprised. No need. Everything is going according to plan. Yang Chendong had no intention to explain. Or rather, he didn't want to explain anything at all. Only he knew the real reason. He wanted to take advantage of this internal strife to take over the entire Japanese empire. Not only that, he didn't want to take over the Japanese royal family. What a joke. He was going to rule this place in the future. If he left the royal family behind, wouldn't he be tying his hands and feet? Although he could keep the king like the other destroyed forces and countries, he didn't have such thoughts about one nation at all. He hoped that these people would die as soon as possible, so that it would be easier for him to carry out some of his work and plans in one nation. These were just selfish motives. It wasn't something that could be shown in public. On the surface, he had enough reasons. That was, Oda Nagamasa's troops in the Onion area couldn't hold on under the attack of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's army. Even if the 5-star army rushed over at full speed, it would still be too late. Since that was the case, it was better to take over the West Sea Road first and let the 5-star army gain a firm foothold. With enough reasons, and the plan was proposed by Yang Chendong, how could the other generals have any objections? What they wanted was nothing more than military exploits and killing enemies on the battlefield to temper themselves. As for where to attack first and where to attack later, they just needed to follow orders. Therefore, after the first battle of capturing Tsushima Island, the 5-star army didn't go north as some of the so-called military strategists of the Japanese Empire expected. Instead, they suddenly went east and entered West Sea Road. Not only did this greatly surprise some people, but it also caught the Japanese army by surprise. Onion area. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was facing the tenacious resistance of Oda Nagamasa. In addition, he received the news that the 5-star army suddenly launched an attack on Tsushima Island. He felt that something bad was going to happen, so he accelerated the attack. In the name of the Supreme General, he mobilized troops from all over the country to launch a fierce siege. For a time, Oda Nagamasa's troops suffered heavy losses and were in imminent danger. Junko was in a small courtyard assigned to her, and her face was full of anxiety. She also heard the news that the 5-star army appeared on Tsushima Island. She wasn't angry about the sudden invasion of an alien race. Instead, she was somewhat happy. According to the time, Kobayashi should have just arrived in North Korea not long ago. Didn't this mean that he still had her in his heart? While she was happy in her heart, she was also worried. Junko didn't know if he could really save her. After all, from the current situation, this place was already very dangerous. Once Ashikaga Yoshimasa attacked this place first, she, the emperor, empress, and her brother would be forced to become hostages. They might even have to live a life worse than before. At that time, even if he wanted to attack, he should have some scruples. Junko had to say that she was thinking too much. You Japanese Empire people are holding your own emperor to threaten who? Yang Chendong is just an outsider, why would he be afraid of such a threat? Once a woman fell in love, her IQ would also drop. Junko was like this. She optimistically thought that the 5-star army came to save her. While she was looking forward to it, another woman appeared beside her, temporarily breaking this unrealistic idea. Princess. The woman who appeared beside Junko was good-looking, especially with a very graceful figure. Yoshiko, why are you here? Junko looked at the woman who came to her side and asked with a smile. She knew this woman. Her name was Yoshiko, and she was a geisha in the royal family. With her good dancing and perfect figure, she attracted the emperor's interest. After being introduced to her, she was specially invited to the palace. Because they were about the same age, they quickly became familiar with each other. Many times, Junko even thought that she and Yoshiko had more in common, which also made the relationship between the two sides much closer. Usually, Yoshiko would find time to chat with Junko. Although one was a princess, and the other was a geisha, the current royal family was so weak that there was no particularly obvious concept of hierarchy, so the two sides talked happily. Seeing Yoshiko appear, Junko thought that she was afraid and wanted to talk to her to reduce her fear. So after greeting her, Junko said with a smile, "Well, you don't have to worry. This princess tells you that the 5-star army is here, and I believe that it won't take long for them to arrive here. At that time, we will be safe." Seeing Junko's yearning look, Yoshiko interrupted her fantasy and said in fluent Japanese, "I'm afraid that the 5-star army won't be able to save the princess." Wait, what are you saying? Junko looked at the usually petite Yoshiko who suddenly said such words, and her tone was so confident. For a moment, Junko was stunned and asked as if she didn't know Yoshiko. "I said that the 5-star army won't be able to save the princess." Yoshiko opened her mouth again. But this time, she didn't say it in Japanese, but in very standard Chinese. Junko's face was full of surprise, and she pointed at Yoshiko and said, "You. How can you speak Chinese?" Chapter 1071. In the Japanese Empire, although it could be said that they were separated from the Han people, Qin Shi Huang sent Su Fu to bring 500 boys and girls to Japan, and that was how the Japanese Empire came to be. This saying was not only in the Ming Dynasty, but also in the Japanese Empire. However, there were very few people in the Japanese Empire who could speak Chinese. After all, this was an island country, and without many opportunities to interact with the outside world, this foreign language was really not very useful. That was why Junko was so surprised. In fact, after she returned to the country, other than the captain of the guards, Kobayashi, this was the first person who spoke Chinese to her. Junko was still surprised, and Tomiko opened her mouth again. "Because I am a Han person, I can naturally speak Chinese. Not only that, but I was also sent by the 6th young master to protect the princess. Oh, by the way, this is a token. I believe the princess will believe me when she sees it." Tomiko took out a portrait, and it was a portrait of Junko, and it was Junko wearing a Ming Dynasty uniform. Judging from the clothes she was wearing, it should be the clothes and appearance she wore when she was studying in the Yang Family Academy. Looking at the portrait in her hand, it seemed as if she was thinking of the happy times she had in the Yang Family Academy. It was impossible for someone without that kind of experience to draw such a picture. Junko raised her head again. At this moment, she already believed that Tomiko was sent by him, but she was still a little curious about the purpose of Tomiko's appearance. You are not from the Japanese Empire, and you are not a geisha. What is your identity?" "The princess is right, I am not a geisha. That is just a way to hide my identity and make you accept me. My real identity is the intelligence director of the CIA stationed in the Japanese Empire. As for the name Tomiko, it sounds very nice, I like it very much." When it was time to show her cards, Tomiko said without hesitation. Revealing her identity was just the beginning, and it was just for the next plan. If she couldn't gain Junko's trust, it would be difficult to carry out the next many tasks. Tomiko's honesty won Junko's favor. More importantly, she knew that all the arrangements were made by Yang Chendong, which was enough to prove that he still cared about her. Especially when she thought that Tomiko's appearance meant that she and her father would be safer. She said happily, "Since that's the case, are you here to save you?" "Yes, the princess is right. But that's not entirely correct. I only want to save the princess, not all of you." Tomiko's expression returned to indifference, as if she had taken the lead from this moment on. "Save me? It's just me." "Yes." Tomiko nodded again. "That won't do. If you want to save them, you have to save my father, mother, and brother as well." Junko said stubbornly. "Impossible." Tomiko shook her head. "With my ability, I can only escape with the princess. As for the emperor, empress, and Prince Ren, Qin Ren, they will be fine. No matter who has the advantage in the end, their safety should be guaranteed. At most, the environment will be a little bad. But as long as the princess can see the sixth young master and ask for his permission, it is only a matter of time before they are saved. Tomiko had her own mission, and now that she was surrounded by enemies, she didn't have the ability to save more people. She was able to take Junko away because she had done a lot of preparation before, so she had the confidence to do so. Junko, who originally wanted to continue to refuse, fell into deep thought. Of course, she knew that Tomiko's words were reasonable, but she still couldn't bear to let her leave her father, mother, and brother like this. Princess, as long as you stay by the sixth young master's side and urge him all the time, it will be possible for the 5-star army to complete the rescue mission. Otherwise, without help, who do you think will be so active? Tomiko thought of Yang Chendong's instructions before she left, so she followed his words. This sentence finally had an effect. Yang Chendong knew Junko well, and Tomiko's words also had an effect, so Junko nodded and agreed. Okay, I promise you, but I have to say goodbye to my father, mother, and brother. Okay, but please be quick. Gongzi still has more than 2 hours, and we will leave here at night. Tomiko agreed. This was something she had prepared for a long time. With her understanding of Junko, some things must be done. Junko went to see her father, who was also the 102nd emperor of the Japanese Empire, Emperor Hirohito of the Garden. After seeing her father, Junko didn't hide anything and told him that Yang Chendong sent people to save her. Father, you have suffered, but as long as you hold on for a while, I will definitely persuade him to send troops quickly and save you. Junko's words also frightened Emperor Hirohito. He didn't expect that he only stayed because he saw Tomiko's good dancing skills, and this coincidence was actually arranged by him in advance. He really didn't know what that person didn't know. Because of this, he also had a sense of fear. Once this kind of smart person had an idea about the Japanese Empire, would he allow him to continue to exist? He was already an obstacle on the other side's way. The best way to deal with an obstacle was to kick it aside, or even eliminate it directly. Since this Bugnam of Gojoseon of the Great Ming Dynasty had calculated everything, how could he not see this step? If so, wouldn't he be in danger? Emperor Hirohito really wanted to tell this matter to his daughter, but he still held back. Since his daughter liked that man very much, then he would let her obtain her own happiness. There were some words that would only hurt feelings if spoken out loud. And most importantly, with his daughter as a link, even if the Japanese Empire was heavily damaged by the 5-star army in the future, as a father, he could more or less benefit from it. Thinking of this, for his own benefit, Emperor Hirohito said, "Father can see that he likes you very much. Since that's the case, then be with him, and then use his power to promote the power of our emperor, and benefit the people of the Japanese Empire." Her father agreed, and he was still so supportive of her. Junko's face was filled with joy. "Yes, father, Junko promises you." When she said this, there was a trace of shyness on Junko's face, but she did not know that this was the last time she saw her father. Everything that happened after that was completely unexpected. When Yang Chendong received the news that the emperor of the harem was killed, he was also surprised. After all, Yang Chendong did not really want to kill this person, even if it was for Junko's sake. He just wanted to use this war to completely weaken the influence of the imperial family on the Japanese Empire. Unlike the leaders of other occupied countries and regions, they would quietly hide people and tell others that they were dead, so as to cut off some people's thoughts, and let them live a peaceful life in private. But often, plans were not as fast as changes. Back to the present. With her father's consent and blessing, Junko quietly left the compound with Tomiko when it was dark. Tomiko had already prepared for all of this. First, she got 2 sets of men's clothes, and with the help of some things, the 2 beauties quickly became 2 middle-aged Japanese Empire men. Then, under the cover of night and the protection of the CIA in the dark, they left the onion area. In order not to be discovered, Tomiko even found a woman who looked similar to Princess Junko. She spent a lot of money to find this woman from the Japanese Empire in order to delay the discovery of the princess's disappearance. The plan went smoothly. Junko was just a girl. In the eyes of Oda Nagamasa, her status was far less important than the emperor and his son, Prince Seiji. She was even less important than Empress Tengara. Junko, who was just a marginal figure, successfully left. Under the unified plan of Yang Chendong, the Five-Star Army didn't attack the Mountain Sun Path. Instead, they suddenly attacked the West Sea Path. The Chikuhu area, Feiho area, Oyu area, and Fengho area were successively attacked by the 150,000 Five-Star Army in multiple ways. Faced with either long guns, short cannons, armored cavalry, elite soldiers, or a sea of soldiers, the defenseless West Sea Path quickly fell. Finally, the army gathered in the Fengshan area, which was the border between the West Sea Path and the Mountain Sun Path, and it only took 13 days. In 10 days, they took down one of the 7 major areas of Nation. Of course, it was because they were caught off guard. It was also because the West Sea Road was on the edge of the Nation, so the defense force was weak. But it also proved the strength of the Five-Star Army. After 13 days, the Five-Star Army gathered again and prepared to attack the Mountain Sun Path and Nagato area from the Fengshan area. The various armies, divisions, and regiments quickly gathered. Behind them, the 500,000 Han people and other foreigners from the Korean province were already in place. They were occupying and digesting the entire West Sea Path. At the same time, some of the Japanese Empire's citizens in the West Sea Path were also forced to board the Five-Star Army's transport ships. They were going to leave this place and go to other provinces under the Yangtze's control. For them, many of them might not be able to return to this place for the rest of their lives. The Five-Star Army obviously came prepared. However, the Japanese Empire's General Ashikaga Yoshimasa wasn't an idiot. After 13 days, under his fierce attack, Oda Nagamasa was finally defeated. He died, and some of his soldiers were killed. Most of them surrendered and became captives. This included the emperor, his empress, and his son, Prince Naruhito. The only regret was that Junko was missing. They only found a girl who looked like her. But it was only a girl who went missing. For the Japanese Empire, who valued boys over girls, it wasn't a big deal. Chapter 1072. The most important thing was that the Emperor of Japan was now in his hands again. General Ashikaga Yoshimasa was very happy. He sent Kayame Sakuki to bring the Emperor of Japan and his family back to the palace in Ping and Beijing. After that, he began to gather more people to prepare for the battle with the Five-Star Army. At the same time, he also wanted to see what reason Yang Chendong would use to start a war in the Japanese Empire if he couldn't save the Emperor of Japan. He could even see that Yang Chendong had no choice but to retreat. He was even prepared to beat the dog while it was down and take the opportunity to ask for compensation and other demands. The Japanese Empire was an independent island country. It had a large army and a strong navy. It wasn't like other small countries that could be destroyed easily. Their territory wasn't small, and they had a large population. If they wanted to escape, they could hide anywhere in the ocean. Even if they couldn't win, they could still escape. They could find an opportunity to come back and take revenge. This was where his confidence came from. It was also why he didn't show any signs of cowardice when facing the Five-Star Army. All these years, Ashikaga Yoshimasa had been in charge of the military and political power. This made his influence very large. Although some of the counties and villages under him had started to have internal strife for benefits. However, the appearance of the Five-Star Army put an end to this situation. When facing an external enemy, the people of the Japanese Empire were still able to grasp the situation clearly. They began to unite around the Japanese Empire's upper echelons with the general as the core. According to the information from the front lines, the Japanese army in the Sanyang Road had a total of 400,000 people. It was nearly 3 times the number of people of the Five-Star Army. In addition, the enemy was familiar with the environment and had sufficient provisions. A tough battle was unavoidable. If it was other forces, facing such difficulties, they would have a headache. They would have to consider whether or not it was the right decision to send troops this time. However, in the eyes of Yang Qindong and the 5-star army, this was nothing. They were used to fighting against the wind. Wasn't the 5-star army developed like this? Looking at the history of the 5-star army's growth, which time did they not win against the many? Which time did they not give people the feeling that they were the weak? It was just a Japanese empire. For the generals of the 5-star army who had experienced hundreds of battles, this was nothing. Just like now, in Yang Qindong's tent, 1st Cavalry Division Commander Tianhu, new Army Commander Su He, C4 Division Commander Ding Yan, and C5 Division Commander He Gong were standing in a row, taking the initiative to ask for battle. The more difficult the battle was, the more one could prove one's ability by winning. When they saw that the Japanese Empire had deployed 400,000 soldiers, they all saw an opportunity. Division Commander Ding, Division Commander He can forget about it. Using the Navy as an army is an arrangement that can only be made when there is no other way. Yang Qindong opened his mouth and directly removed the C Division 4 and C Division 5 from the team. 6th Young Master, we. The two teachers were still indignant and wanted to continue fighting. You what? Do you know that the Japanese Empire has 300,000 soldiers? Your two divisions added together only have 10,000 soldiers. Isn't such a big piece of meat enough for you to chew on? Seeing that the two teachers still wanted to say something, Yang Qindong's words suppressed them and made them unable to argue. But in the blink of an eye, the two teachers heard something different. 6th Young Master, are you saying that the 300,000 Japanese Naval Division will be dealt with by our C Division 4 and C Division 5? The one who asked this question was the C Division 4 Division Commander Ding Yan. In response, Yang Qindong rolled his eyes and said, not only you, there are also 20,000 North Korean Navy. They will be under your command and cooperate with the operation. Of course, if it turns out that you can't suppress the Japanese Naval Division, then this young master will have to consider transferring people from the Navy Command Headquarters. No need, we have no problem. The C Division 4 Division Commander Ding Yan immediately waved his hand, as if he could just leave it to them. Yes, 6th Young Master, we are willing to make a military pledge. The C Division 5 Division Commander said seriously. Yes, we are willing to make a military pledge. The C Division Commander Ding Yan also reacted and immediately stood at attention. Yang Qindong waved his hand and didn't ask them to make a military pledge because he believed that these two teachers would do their best to prove themselves. Besides, the C Division 4 and C Division 5 Division were fully equipped with firearms and had experienced many battles. They could be called elite soldiers. If they still couldn't deal with the Japanese Naval Division, then he really had to consider whether these two were qualified for their current positions. After the two teachers left, there was still a commander and a division commander standing in front of him. Facing their eager eyes, Yang Qindong still refused and said, I know what you mean, but this time you can't take the lead. Leave it to the foreign races. They also need to be sharpened. Yang Qindong's words blocked the mouths of Tianhu and Su He. The two of them also knew that the 6th Young Master was doing this for their own good. Besides, the Japanese Empire didn't only have 400,000 soldiers in front of them. There would be many more opportunities to fight big battles in the future. The two of them didn't say anything else and left the tent. After sending away the 4 generals, Yang Qindong called the 3 division commanders of the Wuxia Division, the Wuxia Division, and the Wuxia Division. He told them that the next task of attacking the Mountain Sun Path would be given to them. Looking at the 3 division commanders, Niu Duo, Tu Hai, and Luan Xiaojiang, the 6th Young Master said sincerely, this is your chance to show off. Just do it. If you all die, this young master will replace you. Yang Qindong had always cherished the lives of his soldiers. Sometimes, in order to reduce the number of casualties, he would personally charge into the enemy lines. However, Yang Qindong always had a different view of the foreign races. This was an army formed for benefits, for the sake of standing out, and for the sake of a better future. Their starting point wasn't necessarily honorable. They didn't even have a sense of identity with him. Many of them had fallen because of him. If an army like this was too strong, who knew if it would become a gunpowder barrel at any time and blow him up? For people with such experiences, if they could die on the battlefield, it would be a good ending. It would dispel Yang Chendong's worries about them, and it would also ensure that the territory under Yang Xie's rule would be more stable and harmonious. Of course, although these people had impure intentions, from a righteous point of view, they were fighting for him and for the 5-star army. Therefore, Yang Chendong was still willing to give them a chance. He wanted them to perform well on the battlefield. If they were really capable, he believed that they would shine brightly. However, most people wouldn't be so lucky. Yang Chendong made a promise in front of the 3 division commanders. He also said that more foreign races were gathering in Korea. It wouldn't be long before they arrived at the Japanese Empire and joined the battle. In other words, no matter how the battle was, their positions as division commanders wouldn't be shaken. Even if they were all killed, they could quickly rebuild. With this promise, Nyo Duo and the other 2 had nothing to be afraid of. In front of Yang Chendong, they said that they would do their best to inflict more damage to the Japanese army and show that the 5-star army wasn't afraid of death and hardships. Beta Persei, who was standing on the side, heard all the conversation. When Nyo Duo and the other 2 left with excited faces, he finally couldn't help but ask, "Young master, with just these 3 divisions, I'm afraid they won't be a match for the 400,000 troops of the Japanese Empire." Who said they were a match? Listening to such a short but straightforward answer, Beta Persei was stunned. Seeing that Beta Persei didn't speak, Yang Chendong smiled and said, "What? Are you very suspicious?" Since they knew that they were no match for them, why would they send these 3 foreign divisions to die on the battlefield? Yes. Beta Persei did think so in his heart, but there were some things that he couldn't ask. He didn't even think that the young master would really answer him. Yang Chendong still answered, "The time isn't right. We are invading for no reason now. We don't have enough reason. It's okay to fight a smooth battle, but once the situation is not good, then problems may arise at any time, so we still need to wait." As for what they were waiting for, Yang Chendong didn't say it clearly, and Beta Persei naturally didn't ask more. Of course, he didn't know that Yang Chendong had another idea, and that was the army of the Japanese Empire, especially their samurai army and ninja army. Their strength couldn't be underestimated. Yang Chendong would value people with ability. He still had a great dream to achieve. Of course, unifying the Asian region was not his goal. Now, unifying the Asian region and integrating the energy here to make sufficient preparations to attack other regions was what he wanted. If the main elite force was sent out at once, the casualties on both sides would not be small. This was not what he wanted to see. What he wanted was more captives, more people who could be used by him. Naturally, the timing was also very important. Next, Yang Chendong asked Beta Persei to find the captain of the Wolf Fang Special Forces, Tai Hu. Some of the following things needed to be done secretly. For example, the 3 foreign divisions were the vanguard. That was a battle on the surface, but in the dark, they needed the powerful Wolf Fang to take action. No one knew what Yang Chendong talked to Tai Hu about. They only knew that after an hour, the captain left. Soon after, teams of Wolf Fang were sent out in different directions to various parts of the Japanese Empire. Ishikami District, under the jurisdiction of the Japanese Empire's Shaanxi Province, adjacent to the Shenyang Province's Anyin District. In a small town called Zhongda in Ishikami District, 2 young men were squatting under the eaves of a very ordinary house, each holding a broken bowl, and begging the pedestrians along the street. Under their ragged clothes, the backs of the 2 people looked a little thin and pitiful. There were rich people in every area, and naturally there were poor people. Beggars could be seen everywhere in Zhongda City, which was not rich. These 2 little beggars didn't attract any attention. Even when the patrolling soldiers on the street passed by them, they would never give them a second glance. Chapter 1073. Thus, the two beggars stayed on the main street in an ostentatious manner. Of course, no one would know that they were the princess of the Japanese Empire, Junko, and the manager of the CIA in the Japanese Empire, Yoshiko, who had escaped from the Onion area. Under the secret protection of the CIA operatives, the two of them walked out of the Onion area and came to the neighboring Jianghu city. They came to a place that had been prepared for a long time. But what was unexpected was that because the five-star army only took 13 days to conquer the entire West Sea Road, it caused the Japanese army in other areas to be nervous. They increased the intensity of their patrols, and for any foreigners who suddenly appeared for any reason, they would strictly investigate them, fearing that they were spies sent by the five-star army. Because of this, the previous safe place could no longer be used. And in order to not attract attention and not have any accidents during the investigation, Yoshiko suggested that they disguise themselves as beggars to avoid all the dangers. After all, Junko was a princess of a country. Even when she was in the capital of Biming, no one wronged her. But now in her own country, she had to disguise herself as a beggar that everyone avoided, so she had some complaints. But Yoshiko said, if you want to take revenge and successfully see the sixth young master, you can only do this. Otherwise, you will be taken away and become one of the threats to the sixth young master. At that time, not only would it be difficult to take revenge, but her life would also be in danger. After weighing the pros and cons, Junko agreed. Now, she stretched out her small hands and squatted on the street with Yoshiko. The two squatted together, paying attention to the pedestrians on the street. When they found that no one was staring at them, Junko whispered, "We have been begging here for 10 days. When will it end? Will sensei really send someone to pick us up? Why do I feel that I am getting more and more used to my current role?" Hearing Junko's complaint, Yoshiko's expression didn't change. Instead, she explained very patiently, "Don't worry, the news has already been spread. The sixth young master will definitely not ignore it. Maybe it won't be long before the people who will save us appear. All we have to do now is wait patiently." Tomiko didn't want to dress up as a beggar, but she had no choice. There were only 6 CIA operatives around them. Once they were discovered, they would be in a very dangerous situation. They had no choice but to do so. However, Tomiko was willing to accept all of this. She had already found out through some channels that the sixth young master was very good to Tomiko. Although it was said to be a teacher-student relationship, it was naturally different from an ordinary teacher-student relationship. This could be seen from the fact that the sixth young master had led troops to appear when the civil strife in Neon had not ended yet. Tomiko also heard that the sixth young master seemed to have a good impression of this foreign princess. What's more, some people said that the sixth young master once had the idea of marrying Tomiko. If all of this was true, then wouldn't her future be infinitely bright since she and Junko had gone through thick and thin together? Because of this, Tomiko was very patient with Junko. Even if they both became beggars, she didn't show the slightest resentment or dissatisfaction. Listening to Tomiko's answer, she thought that even an outsider could accompany her. What else could she be dissatisfied with? What else could she complain about? At that moment, she stretched out her dirty little hand again, as if she was going to order a meal. Time passed day by day. 2 days later. The two women were walking on the streets of Jianghu City, looking for a place to hide today. Suddenly, an accident happened. A gust of wind suddenly blew. Caught off guard, the two women were blown by the wind. Their clothes were blown by the wind, and the broken hat on their head was blown away, revealing their beautiful black hair. At this time, a group of 30 Japanese Empire patrols passed by and saw this scene. After the wind passed, the two women were surrounded. "Who are you?" The leader of the Japanese Empire squad asked in Japanese. We are refugees. Because we encountered bandits, our families were all killed. We sisters have no choice but to live on the streets." Facing the approaching patrols of the Japanese Empire, Tomiko stood up. From the initial panic to calmness, it only took her a breath or two. There shouldn't be any problem with this answer. The only problem was that they were two women, and their figures were quite good. Although their faces were covered with ashes, and it was impossible to see their faces, they were young and had a good figure. Didn't they see that the patrols of the Japanese Empire had evil smiles on their faces? Oh my, it's actually 2 women. And, bring them back to the barracks and investigate their origins. The patrol leader said with a lewd look. His eyes had already looked up and down at Tomiko several times. Obviously, bringing them back for investigation was fake, and it was likely that they were doing something improper. Not only did the 2 women understand this, but even the people of the Japanese Empire who were watching on the streets understood this. It was just that on one side were 30 well-trained soldiers of the Japanese Empire, and on the other side were 2 women who they didn't know at all. Who would stand up for them? The people seemed to know what was going to happen next. One by one, they turned around and left. They were afraid that if they stayed any longer, they would be implicated and taken away. This made the soldiers of the Japanese Empire even more daring. In broad daylight, they surrounded them and were ready to take action. Tomiko was already trembling with nervousness. It was true that she was the princess of the Wu nation. Even if the royal family was in decline, she was still a princess. No one would do anything to her so blatantly. It was the first time she had encountered such a situation. What should she do? What should she do? She also didn't know what to do. She could only tightly grab Tomiko's arm and curl her body into a ball. Tomiko's situation wasn't much better. She was assigned to work in the Japanese Empire after professional training. She was already prepared to encounter danger and even sacrifice her life. But the problem was that she wasn't the only one in danger. The princess was next to her. If it were her, she might have pretended to be obedient. In order to survive, she didn't mind accompanying these stinky men. As a female intelligence agent, she was already mentally prepared for this kind of thing. Something could happen to her, but Tomiko couldn't. She was the person who the 6th young master wanted. If something happened to her, how was she going to explain it to her superiors? How was the entire CIA going to explain it to the 6th young master? She couldn't avoid it, and she couldn't avoid it. Tomiko made up her mind. She bit her lip and suddenly raised her right leg to kick the patrol captain who was closest to her. To be able to enter the CIA, even a woman had to go through some military training to ensure that she had the ability to protect herself in a critical moment. Tomiko made her move. She kicked the opponent's crotch. The opponent gritted his teeth and sucked in a cold breath. His face was very ugly. It was obvious how serious the consequences were. For a moment, the other patrol soldiers were frozen in place. Obviously, they didn't expect that the 2 weak women would dare to fight back when surrounded by fierce soldiers. Could it be that they weren't as simple as ordinary beggars? Take them back. Another deputy captain was the first to come back to his senses. He took over the captain's position and gave the order. More than 20 patrolling soldiers agreed and prepared to besiege them. Then, an accident happened. An arrow suddenly pierced through the air and hit the back of a Japanese Empire patrol soldier. The powerful force directly penetrated the soldier's body. Plop. The Japanese Empire soldier who fell to the ground still had a pained expression on his face. His mouth opened and closed as if he wanted to say something. Obviously, he wasn't completely dead yet. This scene also shocked the other Japanese Empire patrol soldiers. They pulled out their swords and stood back to back, guarding against any danger that might appear at any time and the arrows that might come out of nowhere. This situation lasted for 7 or 8 breaths of time. When they didn't see any more people or danger, the captain who had been kicked in the crotch had almost recovered. At least, he was able to speak. Take these 2 people back. If they resist, I don't care if they live or die. One soldier had already died. The captain was really angry and made up his mind. The 2 Japanese Empire patrol soldiers who received the order came forward. They wanted to reach out and grab Tomiko. At this moment, the arrows that had disappeared earlier appeared again. However, because they were prepared, not only did they not hit anyone, but they also exposed their position. They were discovered by the Japanese Empire soldiers who were watching their surroundings. Then, they swarmed forward to capture them. There were only 6 CIA operatives around Tomiko. They were only responsible for providing cover. They weren't the best at fighting. With 6 people against 30 people, they were obviously outnumbered. In a short period of time, the 6 people who showed their heads were surrounded. One of them had already been cut down and died after being stabbed several times. The situation was very dangerous. There was no way these 6 people could protect themselves. Tomiko anxiously turned around and looked at Tomiko. It seemed as if she was asking for something. Tomiko understood. Tomiko wanted her to reveal her identity. However, she didn't think this would work. Her identity might be useful against people with status. However, to ordinary Japanese Empire soldiers, she was no threat at all. The difference in status between the two sides was too great. Not only that, but she might also bring shame to the imperial family by revealing her identity. Once her identity as a princess was exposed and she was blasphemed by ordinary Japanese Empire soldiers, she wouldn't be able to rest in peace even if she died. Tomiko shook her head and refused Tomiko's suggestion to reveal her identity. Okay, then let's die together. At least we can be companions on the road to the afterlife. Tomiko's voice was a little sad. Then, she became determined. When she came to carry out the mission, she had mentally prepared herself for this. Now that she was willing to die to protect Tomiko, she was sure that the 6th young master would treat her family well. It could be considered a worthy death. Chapter 1074. Let's fight. The broken bowl in Tomiko's hand flew out as she got into a fighting stance. She was determined to die to repay the kindness of the 6th young master and the 5th madam, Sumanair. Tomiko also threw the broken bowl in her hand. When she was in the Yang Family Academy, she did a lot of physical training. Although she didn't learn properly, she still had some strength. At this moment, she also had the idea of dying together with the enemy. She clenched her fists tightly. They're rebelling. Catch them. I want them to pay for all the torture. When the captain saw that the 2 women dared to clamor in front of him, he was furious. He had already decided to teach them a lesson. Even if the 2 of them died, he wouldn't let go of their corpses. The captain's eyes revealed a fierce look. All of this was seen by Tomiko and Tomiko. At the same time, they were also prepared to die. Not far away, only 2 of the 6 CIA operatives were left. One of them was seriously injured and looked like they were about to be wiped out. Tomiko, who had lost all hope, looked in the direction of Deming. At this moment, only Yang Chendong's handsome face flashed in her mind. Perhaps the only thing she did wrong was not staying by his side. Kill. Several Japanese Empire patrol soldiers took the lead. In order to prevent themselves from being taken advantage of, each of them even held a battle sword. They looked like they would really kill the 2 women if they didn't cooperate. With a shout, 2 Japanese Empire soldiers took the lead and rushed forward. 5 steps, 3 steps. They were getting closer and closer to Tomiko and Tomiko. The 2 women gritted their teeth and took a deep breath, preparing to meet the attack head-on. However, at this moment, the sound of air being pierced was heard again. Arrows were shot from afar and accurately hit the chests of the 2 Japanese Empire soldiers. The powerful force directly caused the 2 to scream and fall to the ground. The sudden change also stunned the other Japanese Empire soldiers. They didn't know what to do. Don't be afraid, we're here. With a shout, a tall and big King Kong appeared. Behind him and beside him were 30 Langia Special Forces members. In order not to attract attention, King Kong did not take a gun. Instead, he took a crossbow that was specially used by the Special Forces. This crossbow had a shooting range of 150 steps. At that time, it was already one of the most powerful cold weapons. The moment King Kong appeared, he fired the first arrow. The Special Forces members that he had brought with him also started firing their crossbows. For a moment, the sounds of arrows whizzing through the air could be heard incessantly. One after another, the patrolling soldiers of the Japanese Empire were shot and fell to the ground, dead. With the same number of people, the difference in combat power was like heaven and earth, bringing about different results. Retreat. Seeing the surrounding soldiers fall one by one, the patrol leader knew that things were not going well. He turned around and ran, wanting to go back and report. But just as he turned around, 2 arrows shot through his body at almost the same time, causing him to fall to the ground under the powerful inertia. With the captain dead, the rest of the soldiers were nothing to be afraid of. Just the arrows alone were enough to kill them. From the beginning to the end, the Langia Special Forces members did not have the slightest bit of close contact with the patrolling soldiers of the Japanese Empire. The outcome of the battle had been decided. In the blink of an eye, 30 patrolling soldiers were all dead. However, the remaining 2 members of the CIA operation team were safe and sound. This accurate archery shocked Junko. It also scared some of the brave citizens of the Japanese Empire who were watching the battle not far away. "Captain, do you want to kill them all?" Seeing that some of the citizens who were watching the battle had already screamed and fled in all directions, some of the team members were worried that they would go and report to the higher-ups. No need. King Kong shook his head indifferently. His mission was to rescue Princess Junko and Manager Yoshiko. Since his mission was completed, it was natural for him to retreat. As for whether or not someone would chase after him, he was not worried at all. In fact, he even had some desire. He had not used the gun behind him yet. He wanted to see if his body could withstand the hot bullets. Pack up. Everyone, retreat. The streets soon returned to calm. After waiting for about a quarter of an hour, a large number of Japanese army appeared. When the captain of the infantry saw that 30 of his companions had been killed by the arrows, he made the right decision. Don't chase after them. I'm afraid that they have already run far away. It was not that they did not want to chase after them, but they could not chase after them at all. Otherwise, who knew if they would be able to come back alive? Weren't these 30 people lying on the ground without breathing a good example? Bomo City. It was close to the capital of the Japanese Empire, Ping and Beijing, which could be regarded as the southern gate of the country. In the back garden, the emperor and the empress, as well as their son, were walking on the street of Bomo City. Oda Nagamasa was defeated and killed. As the mastermind behind the bombing of the general's office, this time when they returned to the palace of Ping and Beijing, they were afraid that they would be directly put under house arrest. Fortunately, he and his daughter escaped. Once Junko found the king of martial arts of the Daming South, she might be able to put pressure on Ashikaga Yoshimasa to improve her treatment. The emperor of the Japanese Empire actually entrusted all of his future to his daughter. This was a kind of irony for the emperor of the Japanese Empire, who was extremely patriarchal. He had already thought that the future was very bad. Even if it was his daughter, he just thought about it, and did not have much hope. But he did not know that the reality was more cruel than he thought. A disaster was imminent. Empress Tengara was very beautiful. Whether the royal family had declined or not, after all, it was the face of the Japanese Empire. As the empress, it was necessary to be beautiful. Tengara was not only beautiful, but also had a kind of intellectual beauty. Sometimes, she would show a soft and feminine look. Because of this, her beauty was coveted by many men. It was just that in the palace, there were so many people protecting her that no one had the courage to do anything to her. But now, it was different. On the way to the palace, the protection was a little lax. Especially Yuki Kiyomasa, who was in charge of escorting the empress, drank a lot of sake that night. Although the alcohol content of that thing was very low, in the eyes of Wuxia people, it was not considered wine at all. But the most important thing was that Yuki Kiyomasa, who was a little confused, just happened to come to the room where Tengara was being held. Most of the houses in the Japanese Empire were made of paper. If one wanted to see what was inside, one only needed to gently poke at the window, and everything would be clear at a glance. And when he looked, he just happened to see Tengara, who had just taken a bath and was wearing clothes. Although the time was a little late, sometimes the more hazy the feeling, the more it would arouse people's infinite imagination, and even lead to crimes. Just as Yuki Kiyomesa's mind was in a confused state, after looking, he didn't know where he got the strength to push the door open and enter. The door opened from the outside, and Tengara, who was only half-dressed, turned around in a panic. She saw Yuki Kiyomesa, whose eyes were red and had a lewd smile on his face, striding towards her. "Ah! What are you doing? Someone, come quickly." Out of a woman's intuition, Tengara knew what was going to happen next and couldn't help but shout in panic. Unfortunately, this was not the palace, and there were maids everywhere. This was only a temporary resting place, and all the maids who had followed her out before had all run away. Otherwise, there wouldn't be no one waiting outside the door when the Empress was taking a bath. With her shouting, naturally, no maids or servants came to protect the Empress. Unfortunately, Prince Ren, who was only 15 years old, came out to relieve himself, and heard it. Although Prince Ren was indeed one of the most tragic emperors in the history of the Japanese Empire, he didn't lose his courage when he was young. After hearing his mother's shout, he hurriedly ran over, and saw Yuki Kiyomesa hugging his mother and biting her. No matter what, he was still a prince, the future emperor, and the one who was being bullied was his own mother. How could Prince Ren let it go? After shouting, he rushed over and wanted to kick Yuki Kiyomesa, who was already somewhat unconscious, away. Since young, Prince Ren didn't train much, and didn't do any physical work, so he didn't have much strength. The tearing didn't injure Yuki Kiyomesa, and only tore off a piece of his clothes. Tengara took this opportunity to scratch his face, causing blood to flow out. The alcohol, the stimulation of blood, and the restless feeling in his body caused Yuki Kiyomesa to temporarily lose his mind. Someone actually wanted to disturb him. In a fit of anger, he unsheathed the saber at his waist and abruptly slashed behind him. The poor and unprepared Prince Ren was slashed in the neck, and blood splattered everywhere. With a pair of eyes wide open in disbelief, Prince Ren fell to the ground with a plop. After a few tremors, he stopped breathing. His life ended like this, and he didn't have to live the rest of his life like a coward. He didn't know if it was a good or bad thing for him. After killing someone, Yuki Kiyomesa's mind became much clearer. Especially when he saw that the person he killed was the successor of the emperor, Prince Ren. He finally knew how big of a mistake he had made, and his whole body trembled. Her son died in front of her, and as a mother, Tengara went crazy on the spot. She pounced on Yuki Kiyomesa, wanting to avenge her son. She wanted to kill the murderer who destroyed her hope and life. Several scratches appeared on his face. At first, Yuki Kiyomesa tried to avoid them because of her identity, but after a long time, he was a little annoyed, and in anger, he stabbed forward with his sword. He originally wanted to scare this woman, but he didn't expect that Tengara would rush over when he stabbed her, and then. There was no then. After Prince Ren died, there was another corpse in the room. Ha 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 ha. After a while, Yuki Kiyomesa looked up to the sky and laughed. He didn't expect that he would kill the empress and a prince just because he drank a little too much. Presumably, if this matter was spread out, he would definitely be punished severely. It was even possible that his family would be exterminated. Chapter 1075. Since this was the case, he might as well go all the way and kill them all. At this moment, Kazaki Kumi rushed to the place where the emperor rested. He only wanted to eliminate the root of the problem. Perhaps this was the only way for him to survive. Then, the Queen of Heaven died, Prince Ren died, and the emperor also died. They all died under Kazaki Kumi's blade. Then he called his soldiers to disguise the bodies of the three people. After the traces of a fight were left on the scene, the sky was already bright. Kazaki Kumi carefully thought about his words. After there were no loopholes, he wrote an urgent memorial and sent it to General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was commanding the battle on the battlefield. Of course, Kazaki Kumi would not admit that these three people were killed by him. He only said that someone wanted to kidnap them at night, and he led his soldiers to fight a hard battle. In the end, the people who rescued them escaped, but in the chaos, the emperor's family of 3 was killed. This big event, as the only relative of the 3 people who died, Princess Junko didn't know about it. After being rescued by King Kong and other members of the Wolf Fang Special Forces, they rushed all the way to Changmen Prefecture. Along the way, they encountered several enemy encirclements, and one of them was a ninja team, but under the protection of King Kong and others, they all passed through safely. Half a month later, they finally broke through the layers of obstacles and came to Changmen Prefecture. They came to the front gate of the 5-star Army's barracks. Let's go to see the 6th young master. After Tomiko saw the 5-star Army's flag hanging high in the barracks, the long-time pressure finally completely relaxed at this moment, and then she proposed her idea to Tomiko. Can I wash first? Tomiko didn't immediately agree, but said shyly. Tomiko noticed that Tomiko's face was dirty. How could she let the 6th young master see this? She immediately smiled and said, "Of course. I will have to trouble Captain King Kong. Follow me." King Kong nodded solemnly and led the 2 of them to the barracks. In the main tent, Yang Chendong already knew that Junko had returned safely, but there was no smile on his face. Because of the news that the Japanese Empire's emperor and his family of 3 had been killed, Yes Hen was brought back by Tai Hu, the leader of the Langya Special Forces. When King Kong was sent to Zhongda City to rescue Junko, Tai Hu was also ordered to go to Ping and Beijing to rescue the emperor of the Japanese Empire. Yang Chendong had already made arrangements for the future of the emperor's family, which was to leave the Japanese Empire and go to a place where no one knew their identity to enjoy the rest of their lives. In the end, Yang Chendong still couldn't bear to make the decision to kill them. However, he also wouldn't allow some people to interfere with his matters. The final decision was to get the emperor's family out of here. But the plan couldn't keep up with the changes. When Tai Hu and the others rushed all the way to the Bomo area, they had already received the news that the emperor's family of 3 had been killed. Tai Hu didn't believe it, but carried out an investigation. They caught one of the 9 demon soldiers, who was responsible for cleaning up the battlefield, and then learned the whole story. Everything that happened was somewhat beyond Yang Chendong's expectation. But overall, it was a good thing, because it relieved some of Yang Chendong's worries, and gave him the most honorable reason to send troops to the Japanese Empire. But Junko came back. How could he explain all this to her? But Yoshiko came back with her. Yang Chendong finally decided to leave the matter to others. He really didn't want to see Junko's sad face. Send someone to call Yoshiko. I have something to say to her. King Kong's ability was not bad. Even in the wartime military camp, he still found a bathtub and asked someone to boil enough hot water. Junko was able to wash herself from head to toe, and then changed into the new clothes that had been prepared for her. Then Yoshiko came, and as soon as she appeared, her eyes were red. Obviously she had cried. Speaking of which, when she was in the palace of Ping in Beijing, the emperor's family was also good to her, so she had some feelings for them. Junko. Seeing Princess Junko, who had just bathed and revealed her peerless face, Yoshiko's eyes were red again, and tears flowed out uncontrollably. After a while, there was another heart-wrenching cry from the big tent. The sky was dotted with stars, and after a day of fighting, everything returned to calm. Junko was also calm, and she was accompanied by Yoshiko, walking out of a big tent. Just now, she saw the soldier of the 9 demons, who used to be a guard in the palace, so Junko knew him. From the mouth of this person, Junko knew the whole story, but she had already cried for an afternoon, and her tears had dried up, so she didn't cry anymore. After coming out of the big tent, the silence was somewhat frightening. Where is Sensei's tent? Please take me there. Looking at Captain King Kong accompanying her, Junko asked. In the main tent, Yang Chendong was still looking at the sand table in front of him, thinking about the next military plan. There was a sound of footsteps outside the door, and Beta Persei came in. Young master, Princess Junko is here, and she wants to see you. Yang Chendong did not answer immediately. He first let out a sigh. He knew that what should come would eventually come. Well, bring her in. No one else is allowed to enter without orders. Yes. Beta Persei agreed and stepped back. Junko, who looked a little haggard, then walked into the big tent. The main tent was lit with candles, and when the candles reflected on people's faces, it could show the most beautiful side. It was like looking at a beauty under the moon, and the more you looked, the more beautiful she became. Especially at this moment, Junko's eyes were filled with tears, which gave people a delicate feeling. Sensei. Junko. At this moment, their eyes focused together. Perhaps it was because he hadn't touched a woman since the war, or perhaps it was because of Junko's influence in his heart, but at this moment, when Yang Chendong looked at Junko, he had a different feeling. Especially when their eyes were intertwined. At first glance, she was like a pear blossom with spring rain. At first glance, she was like west shining water by 3 points. At first glance, she was more like a beauty that shamed the moon. At first glance, sensei. Junko threw herself into Yang Chendong's arms, and tears flowed out uncontrollably. Sensei, Junko has no relatives, Junko is very pitiful. Junko, don't worry, I will be your family from now on. Yang Chendong said, lowered his head, and wanted to wipe the tears on Junko's face. But what greeted him was warm lips, and Junko took the initiative to lean over. Junko, who had just found her family, found a sense of security, and was no longer tied down by her family. Her heart was at its softest, and at this moment, she decided to let go of herself and not suppress her feelings for Yang Chendong. In the face of a beauty taking the initiative to throw herself into his arms, Yang Chendong had no intention to refuse. Although he was taking advantage of her, if he refused, he was afraid that it would only hurt Junko's heart. At this moment, he increased the strength in his hands, and after a while, he picked Junko up by the waist and walked straight to the big bed in the inner room of the main tent. Thunder stirred up the earth fire. Outside the main tent, Beta Persei signaled with his eyes, and all the long way retreated 20 meters, clearing the entire tent. After a night of spring rain, Yang Chendong got up from the bed energetically. He didn't disturb Junko, who was sleeping. Fleeing all the way, and then hearing the news of the death of her parents and brother, she had suffered too much and should have a good rest. He took the initiative to walk out of the tent and received the generals outside. First, he met with the commander of the 1st Division, 2nd Division, and 3rd Division. After listening to today's battle plan, he approved it. After watching the 3 division commanders leave, Yang Chendong waved to Division Commander Tianhu, Commander Su He, and Division Commander Su Ke of the 1st Reserve Division. Come here and discuss the next step of the battle plan. 6th Young Master, are we finally ready to fight? Hearing Yang Chendong's call, the 3 generals were excited. Yes. Yang Chendong nodded. After 20 days of stalemate, both sides had suffered losses. The original 60,000 soldiers of the Alien Alliance had been replenished twice in a row. If one counted carefully, nearly 20,000 people died in the battle, and countless people were injured. Of course, the Japanese Empire on the other side was not much better, and their losses would only be greater. But even so, Yang Chendong didn't intend to send out the elite force. First, he still needed to continue to confuse the other side and make them underestimate the enemy. Second, this time, they didn't have a proper reason to send out the troops. The intelligence agency at the front sent news that the Japanese Empire's people were very resistant to the appearance of the 5-star army. So, there were a lot of young people from the Japanese Empire who had signed up to join the army. Ashikaga Yoshimasa also took the opportunity to recruit more soldiers. If this continued, unless they used firearms and razed the entire island to the ground, it would be extremely difficult to occupy this place. Now, Junko had come. She was the princess of the Japanese Empire and the only remaining member of the Japanese Empire's royal family. Her appearance could naturally mean a lot of things. It could also help the 5-star army turn from an invading army into a righteous army. Once there was enough righteousness to support it, it would naturally be time to launch an all-out counterattack. Yang Chendong called a commander and 2 division commanders to talk about the next war plan. He wanted to make all the preparations in advance. Late in the morning, Junko slowly opened her eyes. Separated by the main tent, there was no dazzling sunlight in the room, making people feel very comfortable. As soon as Junko opened her eyes, Tomiko appeared in front of her. Not only her, but there were also 6 maids standing on the side. These were the maids who came to serve Junko. From this moment on, Junko had officially become Yang Chendong's woman. If she wanted, she could quickly become the 8th wife. Chapter 1076. Princess, you're awake. Tomiko looked at Junko, who still had doubts in her eyes, and smiled gently. Then, she began to order people to help Junko dress up. During this process, Tomiko told Junko that Yang Chendong wanted to take her as a concubine. As a princess of the Japanese Empire, marrying someone as a concubine was a disgrace to her status. However, looking at Yang Xie's current power, Junko was the one who benefited. Especially now that the Japanese Empire's royal family had already declined, this was a great blessing for Junko. Despite knowing this, Junko still didn't agree immediately. Instead, she said that she wanted to see Yang Chendong first before making a decision. Not long after, everyone else in the main tent went out. Yang Chendong was also invited back to meet Junko in the main tent. After a night, there seemed to be a gap between the two. Junko didn't take the initiative to throw herself into his arms. Instead, she stared at Yang Chendong with a thoughtful look. In response, Yang Chendong sat down leisurely. He took a sip of the tea in front of him and let Junko look at him from head to toe. After a long time, Junko finally spoke. "Sensei, why did you bring the army to the Japanese Empire this time?" "To save you." Yang Chendong answered in a very capable manner without the slightest hesitation. Obviously, he already knew what Junko wanted to ask. This answer made Junko feel a little touched. However, thinking of her own doubts, she didn't express anything. Instead, she continued to ask, "Sensei, now that my father, mother, and brother are all dead, the internal strife in the Japanese Empire is about to be quelled. If I ask you to withdraw the army now, will you do so?" "Yes." Yang Chendong still said without any hesitation. His answer was so straightforward that it made Junko feel like she couldn't believe it. Although this was indeed what she wanted to hear, she still suppressed her joy and said, "All right then, teacher, please give the order to retreat." "Okay." Yang Chendong stood up and strode out of the tent. From the moment he came in to the moment he left, he had only said 4 words, but it had already broken through all the defenses in Junko's heart. At this moment, she finally stopped being reserved and took the initiative to run behind Yang Chendong and hugged him. "Teacher, everything is just Junko's test. Please don't blame me, and don't withdraw the army." Yang Chendong pretended to be confused, but in his heart, he already had a card up his sleeve. He turned around, looked at Junko, and said, "If the 5-star army doesn't retreat, with our strength, it won't be long before the Japanese Empire becomes one of Yang Xie's subordinate provinces. Don't you understand this logic?" "I understand." "Then why are you still?" Yang Chendong pretended to be confused and said, "Junko also understands that the Japanese Empire has nothing to do with me anymore. It abandoned us first, abandoned the entire royal family. In order to prove their mistake, the Japanese Empire must be destroyed. This is the price they have to pay for killing my parents and brother. Teacher, you will definitely help you get revenge, right?" Junko looked at Yang Chendong with a hopeful face, waiting for his answer. "No." Unexpectedly, Yang Chendong shook his head decisively. "This time, we mobilized the army for your safety. Now that you are fine, the 5-star army has to retreat. We are not an invader, we are the army of justice. Before this, the Japanese Empire didn't provoke us, so..." At first, when Yang Chendong said that they could retreat, Junko was still a little doubtful. But now, what he said made her even more determined. She finally knew that the five-star army didn't have any intention of attacking the Japanese Empire. They really only wanted to save her. At this moment, Junko's heart was moved. At the same time, she was even more determined to avenge her parents. She even wanted to slap all the people in power in the Japanese Empire and let them know the consequences of abandoning the royal family. In order to let Yang Chendong do something, Junko took the initiative and said, "I am willing to be your 8th wife. If someone bullied your wife's family, and cruelly killed them, can you avenge her?" Junko looked at Yang Chendong, who was still hesitating. She gently pulled his arm like a spoiled child. "This is something that should be done," Yang Chendong said with a helpless look. After saying this, Yang Chendong felt a little guilty. He also knew that this matter couldn't be hidden from the smart Junko for long. He was afraid that she had already noticed something, but presumably, no one would ever mention this topic again. "Thank you, sensei. Then please send the troops. When the time comes, I will denounce Ashikaga Yoshimasa in the name of the royal family's princess. I will let the people of the Japanese Empire know who harmed the royal family, who started the civil war, and who wants to overthrow the Japanese Empire." The more Junko said, the more determined her expression became. Just from this point alone, she had already made up her mind. Seeing another country send troops to destroy her own country, and it was because of her own request, no one would be in a good mood. But Junko didn't feel any unhappiness at this moment. On the contrary, her heart was filled with hatred, and she longed for the happiness that victory would bring her. Since this country had abandoned his imperial father and imperial mother, then let it perish. "Okay, I promise you." Yang Chendong was waiting for this result to appear. It seemed that she was just a woman. She couldn't mount a horse to wield a sword, nor could she kill the enemy. But she was the princess of the Japanese Empire, the last remaining member of the Japanese Empire's royal family. The situation was completely different. With Junko's support, Yang Chendong had a righteous cause, and he had a good reason to send troops. What's more, the original Japanese Empire wasn't united. The Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa seemed to have a monopoly on power, but there were still many hidden opponents. It was just that they were too scattered and couldn't form a united force. In the past, the Emperor of the Back Garden was unable to integrate this power together, but Yang Chendong did have such strength. Because he had the strength to compete with Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and was even stronger than him. In other people's eyes, this was a big tree, a tree that was far more luxuriant than the Supreme General. Junko's heart was filled with hatred, and with Yang Chendong's support, she quickly wrote a document to announce to the world. First, she described in detail the cause of her father, mother, and brother's death. Then, she pointed at Ashikaga Yoshimasa and said that this villain wanted to overthrow the power of the royal family and bring a disaster to the entire Japanese Empire. Finally, she called on all the heroes of the Japanese Empire to work together to deal with Ashikaga Yoshimasa and restore the Japanese Empire to its former glory. This document was read and approved by Yang Chendong, and it was sent out. It appeared in various cities of the Japanese Empire through the intelligence network, causing a huge response and influence. Hokuriku, one of the 7 provinces of the Japanese Empire. As one of the most important regions of the Japanese Empire, it was under the jurisdiction of General Hirai. Hirai, whose full name was Flatwell Field, was one of the more trusted and important ministers of the Backyard Emperor. When he was in the imperial court, he caused a lot of trouble for Ashikaga Yoshimasa, so much so that the latter spent a lot of effort to get rid of him. In order to achieve his goal, he even handed Hokuriku over to him. According to Ashikaga Yoshimasa's plan, once Flatwell Field left the palace and the emperor of the backyard, he could kill him at any time. Not only would he solve his worries, but he would also be able to vent his anger. However, Flatwell Field was much more powerful than he had imagined. After leaving Ping and Beijing, he disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in Ekizan prefecture of Hokuriku and had taken control of part of the military power there. This result made Ashikaga Yoshimasa furious. Just as he was about to send troops to deal with him, the bombing of the general's residence happened. He had no choice but to shift his attention to dealing with Oda Nagamasa and the imperial family. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Flatwell Field went all out and integrated the power of the entire Hokuriku. He was ready to cooperate with Oda Nagamasa and help the imperial family regain all their power. However, everything changed a little too quickly. Flatwell Field had just finished the integration work when news of Oda Nagamasa's defeat and the death of the imperial family came from the front lines. When he first heard the news, Flatwell Field couldn't believe it. When he found out that it was true and not fake news deliberately spread by someone, he couldn't stop crying. He found that he suddenly had no goal, no target or object to be loyal to. Flatwell Field was a very thoughtful and capable person. Usually, such a person would be able to see the most crucial point in a chaotic situation and make the right choice. It was because of this ability that he couldn't stop crying. In his eyes, without the imperial family, there was no one in the Japanese Empire who could suppress General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Because he was a smart person and could see this, he felt that there was no hope ahead. He could even see that after eliminating the imperial family, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's next target would be him. Without the support of the imperial family, Flatwell Field knew that there was no way he could reach the heights of the general with his own ability. Even if he couldn't win, the only way left was to escape. Fortunately, he had led his troops to conquer Noden Prefecture. Behind it was the vast ocean, which was his escape route. Flatwell Field withdrew his troops and stockpiled food and money. He was ready to retreat at any time. It was at this time that the letter written by Junko announced to the world that the last member of the royal family, the last hope, spoke in her unique voice. When Junko's letter suddenly appeared on the street after one night, Flatwell Field, who was ready to retreat, saw hope again. After shouting, "God has eyes," in his mansion, he gathered all his important subordinates. He decided to cooperate with Junko to deal a heavy blow to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. As long as there was a way to survive, no one would choose to leave their home. As long as there was a little hope of victory, everyone would want to fight. Flatwell Field was such a person. Chapter 1077. In the entire Japanese Empire, Flatwell Field wasn't the only one. Some of them were targeted by Ashikaga Yoshimasa and could be retaliated against at any time. Some didn't like the Supreme General and would look for an opportunity to stab him in the back. Some had the same ambition and knew that only by eliminating Ashikaga Yoshimasa would they have a chance to succeed. No matter what kind of thoughts they had, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was too powerful, had obviously become the target of many people's hidden attacks. Especially when Princess Junko's document was released, it gave these people a suitable excuse. Soon, the anti-Supreme General's forces began to appear everywhere, and the situation took a major turn. Flatwell Field of Hokuriku was the first to respond. Under the leadership of Princess Junko, he gathered 80,000 troops in Ekizan Prefecture and acted as if they were going to attack Ashikaga Yoshimasa's lair from Ping and Beijing. Everything was afraid of someone taking the lead. Flatwell Field's actions quickly received responses from everywhere. For a time, the Japanese Empire was filled with anti-Supreme General voices. The people of the Japanese Empire were also confused because of all these voices. Originally, the Supreme General's name was very well known in the hearts of the people. In addition, the Emperor of the Backyard, who was threatened, had publicly said more than once that the Japanese Empire was where it was today because of the Supreme General. This caused some people who didn't know the truth to believe in Ashikaga Yoshimasa. This was also the reason why when the five-star army suddenly appeared, Ashikaga Yoshimasa raised his arms and called for enlistment in the name of the Supreme General. That was because everyone believed in him. But now, with the uproar in various places, especially those who were unfavorable to Ashikaga Yoshimasa, most of the people began to wait and see. What? The 100,000 new soldiers that Takedo prepared aren't coming? Ashikaga Yoshimasa angrily looked at General Mari Masanori, who was reporting the situation to him, in the temporary residence of Yasunori district. The Maori regularization, who was not tall and had small eyes, was being reprimanded with his head lowered. He knew that he would be scolded this time, but he still came. Since some things had changed, he had to report it to the general in advance so that he could make countermeasures. Yes, General. It's not just the 100,000 new soldiers from Donghai province who are not coming. The new armies from other regions are also facing some problems. Baka. Ashikaga Yoshimasa cursed angrily and slammed his palm on the desk in front of him. His eyes were burning with anger. Of course, he knew why such a problem had occurred. It was all because of the document Princess Junko had announced to the world. To be honest, he didn't think much of this woman at first. Even when Kiyoshi reported that someone wanted to save the emperor and was killed by him, he wasn't angry. Instead, he was a little happy. For a long time, the royal family had been a huge dark cloud over his head. Although he tried his best to weaken the influence and sense of existence of the other party, it had to be said that more people still recognized the royal family. Many forces that opposed him often used the royal family's name to suppress him. Finally, they were all dead. Although from the information he received, it was very likely that it was done by his subordinate Kiyoshi in private, this matter was not directed by him. Wasn't this the will of the heavens? Did the heavens want the royal family to die? Did the heavens want to give him, the general, a chance to rise? Without the existence of the royal family, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was ready to ascend the throne. As for whether there would be opposition forces, so what? He would fight and win them over. He often used such methods, and the reason why he was able to reach his current position was because of this set of methods that had made a miraculous contribution. He was even more convinced that any schemes, tricks, and the actions of villains were not worth mentioning in front of absolute strength. As for the sudden appearance of the 150,000 five-star army, Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't pay much attention to them. After fighting for these days, he believed that he had grasped the strength of the other party. They were only a little stronger than the ordinary army of the Japanese Empire, but their number was still small, so there was no need to worry. Originally, the situation was good. As long as he could force the five-star army to retreat, he could withdraw and deal with the forces that opposed him. Finally, he could destroy them one by one and achieve his goal of becoming the emperor. But all of this was completely changed because of the appearance of Junko. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was just a woman. Even if she was reborn in the back garden, he wouldn't have the slightest fear. But the most amazing thing was that Junko's announcement made the five-star army and the forces in the country who opposed him have a common language and can walk together. As a result, he became a rat crossing the street, and everyone wanted to beat him up. According to the Maori regularization, the people who opposed him were gradually gathering. Once these people really gathered together, even if he was the general, it would be difficult for him to gain any advantage. It was even possible that he would be defeated and killed. Let Nishi Toshihide negotiate with the great southern martial king. We can give them some benefits. After solving the domestic problem, it won't be too late to deal with them. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was a person who stood at the top for many years, so he quickly made the right decision. Nishi Toshihide was born in an aristocratic family. He was very famous in the Japanese Empire for being eloquent. This person was not only knowledgeable, but also learned martial arts from an early age. He was one of the talents that Ashikaga Yoshimasa relied on the most. After receiving the order, he set off from Onyon Prefecture to Nagato Prefecture, and sent his name to the five-star army's camp first. This person is very cunning and agile. He is good at both civil and martial arts. He is an important helper of Ashikaga Yoshimasa. After reading the name, Junko told everything she knew to her husband, Yang Qindong. After returning to China for 2 years, Junko had a more detailed understanding of the situation in the Japanese Empire. With her identity, plus the importance that the emperor attached to her, it was not difficult to know some secrets. With this feature, she became one of Yang Qindong's strategists to attack the Japanese Empire. Oh, so powerful? Yang Qindong asked with interest. Yes, King, I suggest that you kill this person. Junko's eyes were firm. Since she was with Yang Qindong, she also changed the way she addressed him. She used to call him teacher, but now she called him king. It represented a kind of maturity and progress. With this relationship, she was confident that she could take the opportunity to kill Nishi Toshihide. It could be considered as collecting a little interest for the death of her father and mother. As the saying goes, the greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. This time, Junko was destined to be disappointed, because Yang Chendong did not listen to her suggestion. Instead, he shook his head and said, "How can I break this rule and let others laugh at me?" Yang Chendong did things based on his heart. Sometimes, in order to achieve his goals, it was inevitable that he would use some underhanded means. For a person like him, the saying of not killing the messenger in a war had nothing to do with him, but he still used this as a reason to say it. This only proved that he didn't want to take Ningxi Duishio's life yet. Since Junko's letter was announced to the world, the situation in the Japanese Empire had undergone a major change. This change was, of course, what Yang Chendong wanted to see, but it was still too far away from the final victory. What Yang Chendong wanted was not to surrender, but to destroy. What Yang Chendong wanted was not for everyone to surrender to the Japanese Empire's royal family and Princess Junko, but for them to surrender to him, to submit to the Five-Star Army, and to submit to the Han Dynasty. In order to achieve this goal, he needed to severely damage the local army of the Japanese Empire. Before the final goal was achieved, he didn't want to see any side win. What he wanted was for Ashikaga Yoshimasa to fight with the other forces, and for both sides to suffer. In order to achieve this goal, a talent like Nishi Toshihide had to display his strength. How could he let him die so easily in front of him? Junko naturally didn't know about Yang Chendong's thoughts. She thought that this was the honest side of her husband, so she immediately expressed her admiration and said, "My king, are you really going to negotiate with them? The war has already reached this point, and they killed your parents and brother. How can we negotiate?" Yang Chendong chuckled, then said to Beta Persei behind him, "Go, inform them that after Nishi Toshihide enters our camp, everything will be carried out according to the first plan." Junko didn't know what the first plan was, but soon on the third day, Nishi Toshihide came to the big tent of the Five-Star Army. After seeing Yang Chendong and Junko, the result was quickly announced to the world. Nishi Toshihide came. Compared to the average people of the Japanese Empire, he was 1.75 meters tall, which was not short at that time. His facial features were regular, he had thick eyebrows and big eyes, and he spoke very humbly and warmly, giving people a good first impression. "Please." Yang Chendong smiled and sat opposite Nishi Toshihide with Junko. Tomiko was responsible for serving the brewed tea. Tomiko, who was originally the CIA's supervisor in the Japanese Empire, has now become the person Junko trusts the most. After reporting to the CIA, the fifth madam, Su Monair, gave her to Junko and became her personal maid. "Thank you." Ningxi Duishio spoke in a somewhat awkward but still understandable Chinese. After she finished speaking, she suddenly lowered her head, fully displaying her humble side. I didn't expect Nishi Toshihide to also know Chinese. That will eliminate the language barrier. Come, try the tea of my Wuxia, this is a good tea before the Ming Dynasty." Yang Chendong had a smile on his face, looking harmless to humans and animals. The meeting between the two sides was carried out in such a peaceful atmosphere. During the meeting, Nishi Toshihide observed Yang Chendong more than once. No matter how he looked at it, he couldn't connect the person who destroyed many countries and forces in the southern barbarian land of the Great Ming Dynasty with the young man in front of him. Chapter 1078. Although Ningxi Doxiu was familiar with some Chinese, he probably didn't know that there was an old saying in Wuxia, "Keep your strength hidden." There was even a less elegant saying among the people, "A dog that bites doesn't bark." Just as the two sides were negotiating, the Five-Star Army had already implemented the first set of plans and was in the process of implementing them. To Yang Chendong, there really wasn't much to talk about with the Japanese Empire. Thinking about the various things that would happen in the future, in order to prevent the painful scenes of the people of Wuxia from happening again, he felt that it was necessary for him to resolve some problems in advance. In the large tent, the tea drinking continued. It seemed that both sides had no intention of immediately entering into negotiations. Of course, Ningxi Doxiu took the initiative to bring it up a few times, but it was all resolved by Yang Qindong. It was as if they were really reminiscing about the past, even though there was nothing to talk about. Outside the large tent, or rather, outside the main tent, the world's 1st Cavalry Division, the Grasslands' new army, and the 1st Reserve Division had all set out, charging straight towards the Japanese Empire's army. The competition between the two sides had been going on for a long time. Both sides had suffered casualties, and both sides had won and lost. This was the most realistic way to describe it. After a long period of fighting, the Japanese army had already gotten used to the 5-star army's fighting style and combat strength. Ningxi Doxiu had already gone to the 5-star army's main camp to begin negotiations. Some of the more optimistic people even thought that the war would end soon. How would the Japanese army know that the ones who had fought with them before were just some foreign allied forces that had just entered the battlefield? Their combat strength couldn't be said to be the weakest of the 5-star army, but there was still a large gap between them and the strongest. The reason why they had chosen to fight to the death with the Japanese army was to deplete the number of foreign men, and also to train the soldiers. Of course, the most important point was to show the enemy that they were weak. Now, it seemed that their goals had been achieved. Once there was an outstanding seedling in the foreign allied forces, they would quickly be selected by the 1st Reserve Division. This rhythm of selecting elite soldiers and sending inferior soldiers to their deaths caused the 3 foreign allied forces to suffer heavy losses. It also allowed the 1st Reserve Division to expand from the original 20,000 to 30,000 people. These 30,000 people were veterans who had experienced the baptism of war. They were veterans who had climbed out of piles of corpses. Their strength could be imagined. But they weren't the strongest. The 1st Cavalry Division was the trump card of the 5-star army. They were in existence was comparable to the cold vanguard army, and even better in this kind of battle. The trump cards trumps army's side. SSSSSS. As a daimyo, Tanaka had 50,000 soldiers in his hands. Under the orders of General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, he was responsible for the left wing of the 1st and 2nd lines of defense in Nagato Prefecture. He and another daimyo named Kazumi became the 2 gatekeepers, blocking the advance of the 5-star army. With the support of the general, although the 2 daimyos suffered heavy losses in the battle against the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd divisions, the soldiers were quickly recovered, and the military system was perfected, which made them very satisfied. It wasn't like he would be the one to die. This kind of hard work could still be seen by the Grand General. Once the war was over, he would definitely be rewarded for his contributions. That would be the time when he would be promoted to the position of a general. Thinking that once he became a general, he would be second only to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. No matter what Kazumi thought, Tanaka was really happy. In particular, Ningxi Doxiu also went to the 5-star army's camp to negotiate, which was tantamount to the war coming to an end. Seeing that the overall situation was settled, his mood was even better. When people were in a good mood, they would naturally infect others. Just last night, Tanaka gathered the 2 chiefs, several county magistrates, and generals under him to drink until they were drunk. The war had been going on for more than a month, and everyone's spirits were too tense. It was time to relax. In Tanaka's eyes, since Ningxi Doxiu was sent to negotiate, and the 5-star army agreed, it at least proved that the war would not happen again in a short time, and they could relax. This was a conventional way of thinking, and there was nothing wrong with it. But if people fully understood Yang Qindong's habits, they would find that this was not a person who played according to common sense at all. Often, the rules that everyone thought were the rules, he simply turned a blind eye to them. Otherwise, he wouldn't have expanded the Yangxia army to such a scale in just a few years. In the early morning, Tanaka and his generals were still sleeping in the big tent, and the tent was full of the smell of alcohol. It could be seen that they really drank a lot last night. In addition, they found some military geisha to adjust the atmosphere, and it was quite successful. Those who could drink half a caddy drank half a caddy, those who could drink half a caddy drank half a caddy, those who could drink half a caddy drank nearly 2 caddies, and they all fell to the ground. In the big tent, the sound of snoring, teeth grinding, and sleep-talking came one after another. Compared to the so-called relaxation of the Japanese army's higher-ups, the soldiers below also became a lot more relaxed because there was no leader to manage them. In the morning, the soldiers didn't get up to exercise, but sat together in groups of 3 or 5 to chat. If the leaders needed to relax, why wouldn't they? Everyone was enjoying this short period of peace during the war. There were even some soldiers who, because they were too tired from the continuous fighting, went back to sleep after waking up in the morning to check that the army was fine. This was called subordinates follow the example of their superiors. Without anyone to manage them, the soldiers were like a mass of loose sand. They each took care of their own things, and once something happened, they would only fight for themselves. 6 miles away from the Japanese Empire's camp, the 1st Heavenly Cavalry Division was quickly gathering. On the other side, 5 miles away, the new army was also gathering, and they were all preparing for the upcoming battle. Commander, there are still half a quarter of an hour before the 6th young master's scheduled attack time. The 1st Regiment commander, Temu, walked to Tianhu's side and reported softly, the new army should also be ready to attack. I heard that they are very excited and are preparing to fight a good battle to steal the limelight of our 1st Heavenly Cavalry Division. Tianhu didn't take Temu's words to heart. Instead, he said something very proud, how can the limelight of our 1st Cavalry Division be suppressed by others? He. Seeing how confident his commander was, Temu laughed. Strictly speaking, Temu had joined the 5-star army earlier than Tianhu. When he was fighting on horseback, Tianhu was still a good student in the Yang Family Academy. However, he wasn't unhappy that he was able to become a regiment commander under Tianhu's command. It was all because he was convinced. Whether it was horseback riding, control of the battlefield, or commanding an army, Temu didn't think that he was better than Tianhu. For example, some of the orders given by the higher-ups. Why didn't they attack in the middle of the night or at daybreak? Why did it have to be at daybreak when the enemy should have woken up before attacking? What was the reason for all of this? Why did the 6th young master give such an order? To be honest, Temu didn't understand. If he was the commander of a regiment, he would definitely ask why. However, Tianhu didn't. The one who sent the order was Beta Persei. He only said that it was the 6th young master's order and Tianhu carried it out unconditionally. He was at the scene when this happened. Just based on this calmness, it wasn't something he could compare to. Tianhu was indeed smart. This had to do with his background as a student of the Yang Family Academy. Because he learned from Yang Chendong, he could understand more of Yang Chendong's intentions in many matters. For example, he had his own unique views on the timing of the attack this time. In his opinion, this should be Yang Chendong's intention to defeat the enemy fair and square. Through this battle, he could show the elite and powerful side of the 5-star army and achieve the purpose of intimidating the enemy. Of course, there was another advantage to fighting during the day. It would be easier to capture more captives. After all, vision was not good in the dark and it was too chaotic. It was very easy for deserters to escape. This idea was indeed correct. Yang Chendong did have such an idea. He wanted to defeat the Japanese army in broad daylight on the battlefield and use this to build the 5-star army. Once the elites were deployed, they would be invincible in the world. When the defeated Japanese army saw this scene with their own eyes, word of mouth spread. Presumably, when the name of the 5-star army was mentioned in the future, everyone would tremble from the bottom of their souls. If he wanted to achieve his goal, it was impossible to do it in the dark. The light was not good, and it was impossible to see what was happening. It was also impossible to do it when it was just dawn. Most people were still in a confused state and could not make a clear judgment. However, it was different after daybreak. Everyone was up and could make a clear judgment. As for whether this would bring some pressure to the 1st Cavalry Division and the new army, Yang Chendong really did not think that it would be a problem. Needless to say, the 1st Cavalry Division was invincible. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were invincible. It was common for them to win with fewer people, especially after the Japanese army had adapted to the attack rhythm of the Foreign Alliance's C-rank army. It would be strange if the A-rank army did not suddenly appear and cause the enemy to panic. As for the new army, their combat strength was a bit weaker. If they were not cavalry, they would not be ranked as the army closest to the A-rank army. However, they had more people and more horses. Once the 30,000-strong cavalry launched an attack, just the aura they exuded was unstoppable. No one could match them. Facing such a strong army, not to mention that it was the time for peace talks, the Japanese army would not be prepared. Even if the enemy was prepared, so what? Yang Chendong was also confident that he could kill the enemy. One would throw away their armor, and the other would be utterly defeated. The 5-star army did indeed have such strength. All of this was not because Yang Chendong was arrogant. It was the result of battle after battle. Chapter 1079. While the 1st Cavalry Division was quickly assembling, the new army wasn't idle either. Commander Su he was mobilizing the troops according to the plan, and he had basically completed it. At this moment, he was looking ahead, as if he could see through the distance of several miles and see the Japanese army's camp. In the past, Su He and Tian who had competed for the position of commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. But later, he gave up. Of course, at that time, the commander of the new army, Tiger's Mane, and the deputy commander were eager to let go of his talent. But more importantly, he himself understood that he was born as a surrendered general, and Tian who was the student of the 6th young master. He had already lost at the starting line. For a sharp blade like the 1st Cavalry Division, even the 6th young master, who had always been fair and just, would not easily hand it over to others. It was even more unlikely that he would hand it over to a fallen general like himself. After thinking things through, Su He took the initiative to give up, and sure enough, he gained the favor of Yang Chendong, which was why he was now the commander of the new army. But without the current commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Su He had always believed that it wasn't because he was inferior, but because of his background and environment. In order to prove himself, he had thought more than once about competing with Tian Hu. He wanted to use reality to tell everyone that he, Su He, was not inferior to Tian Hu, and was even stronger than him. Today was an opportunity. The new army and the 1st Cavalry Division were attacking the two wings of the Japanese army. Although in terms of combat power, the 1st Cavalry Division was indeed much stronger than the new army, and even the first established new army was no match for it. But with the advantage of numbers, he might still have a chance. Commander Ku, inform everyone to be in their best condition. We want the enemy to unconsciously feel weak and afraid when they hear the name of the new army. Su He called Kulu, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, and ordered. Yes, please rest assured. These days, everyone has been holding back their energy. Kulu said solemnly. In addition to being the vanguard in the first battle and capturing Tsushima Island, the new army rarely made any big moves, especially when facing the Japanese army in Changmen Prefecture. They had been watching the performance of the three foreign armies, and the brothers had been holding back. This was such a good opportunity to make a contribution, but they had no chance to participate. If the 1st Cavalry Division and the 1st Reserve Division weren't watching the show like them, some people would have expressed their dissatisfaction. Now that the opportunity had finally appeared, Kulu was of course very excited. It was said that a soldier who didn't want to be a general wasn't a good soldier, and the position of a division commander wasn't the end of Kulu's pursuit. He wanted to lead an army alone one day, or even more people to kill in all directions. Whether it was the 1st Cavalry Division or the new army, they were all ready to attack with all their strength. On the contrary, the 1st Reserve Division, who was in the middle of the attack, wasn't so excited. There was only one reason: they were infantry, and their speed couldn't catch up with the cavalry. The commander of the 1st Reserve Division, Su Kuda, had also fought his way up through the flames of war. He was a fierce general with both courage and wisdom. Yang Chendong had taken a liking to him and promoted him to the position of commander of the 1st Reserve Division, becoming another dazzling new star in the military. Su Kuda was naturally very excited about Yang Chendong's favor. When he learned that he could come to the battlefield of the Japanese Empire, he wanted to perform well and make a great contribution to prove that the 6th young master didn't misjudge him. But today, Su Kuda wasn't in a good mood. He actually had to go out with the 1st Cavalry Division and the new army to kill the enemy. Without the help of war horses, how could 2 legs outrun 4 legs? Pass down the order, don't rush too fast, tell everyone to save their strength. Su Kuda calmed down and said with a slightly disappointed tone. Commander, why? Is it because there are cavalry troops on both sides of us? The commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Kang Biyao, was puzzled. He was also a general who fought on the battlefield, and could be said to have killed countless people. People like him often had a very obvious characteristic, and that was that he didn't know what death was. Seeing that Kang Biyao was asking him why, Su Kuda said in a bad mood, yes, it's because they are cavalry, and we can't keep up with them. Okay, you go and pass down the order, tell the brothers that this time, we will focus on capturing captives. Su Kuda, who had a strategy, had already decided on a position for himself. Since his speed wasn't as fast as his allies, then he might as well capture captives. This was also a great merit. In this way, the left, middle, and right sides were all ready to attack. When the hands on the watches on the 3 commanders' wrists pointed at the time of attack, the 5-star army moved madly, and the earth shook, and the attack began. The cavalry troops on the left and right sides were the first to rush out. Looking from afar, they looked like a torrent that was rapidly approaching from afar. From afar, they covered the sky and covered the sun, bringing up billowing smoke and dust behind them. When looked at from afar, they were like arrows that had left the bow as they dashed over, and they carried an indomitable spirit and courage. From afar, their murderous aura filled the sky, giving people a feeling that they couldn't resist. The movement of the cavalry troops quickly attracted the attention of the opposite Japanese army. The moment the ground started to shake, some of the experienced veterans of the Japanese Empire quickly stood up. They first looked into the distance, wanting to see what had caused such a big movement. Then they got what they wanted. When they saw the countless cavalry troops in the distance, and the bright 5-star flag, their faces changed from curiosity to panic, and then to horror. Some of them were already trembling, some stood there stupidly, some turned around to get their weapons, and some couldn't help but retreat. They were ready to find a way to escape. In order to let the Japanese army have their own self-confidence, the higher-ups of the army suppressed the news that there was a large number of cavalry troops in the 5-star army. They only told them that the number of cavalry troops in the 5-star army was limited, and they wouldn't be able to play any role in such a big battle, so there was no need to worry. Originally, they didn't want to cause too much pressure on their own soldiers, but when the cavalry troops appeared, there was a huge contrast between what they understood and what they saw in reality. When they saw that the cavalry troops of the 5-star army were not a small group, but endless, the Japanese army was already in chaos. Hold on, archers, prepare to shoot, the rest of you prepare to stop the horses. The daimyo on the left side, Kazumi Kamikaze, was somewhat calm. Seeing the cavalry of the 5-star army getting closer and closer, he hurriedly gave the order. Although he didn't know what effect this would have, he couldn't take the lead to escape, right? As long as we can stop the cavalry's speed, we can wear them down. As if to encourage himself, and as if to give confidence to the soldiers below, Kazumi Kamikaze shouted loudly and issued the order. If Kazumi Kamikaze was a qualified commander, then Tanaka, who was guarding the right side, was too unprofessional. At this moment, he was still sleeping in the big tent, so when the soldiers below came to call him, he still didn't open his eyes. Get some cold water, go. It was Tanaka's confidant, and he was also one of his subordinates, so he had no choice but to order the soldiers. A bucket of cold water was quickly brought, then poured on Tanaka's body. Tanaka was stimulated by the cold water and finally woke up. When he saw that all of this was caused by his own soldiers, he was so angry that he raised his hand and slapped the elder, then he shouted angrily. Baka! Master! After the elder slapped him, he lowered his head, but soon he raised his head again and said, "The 5-star army has launched an attack, and they are using countless cavalry troops. Let's run." "What?" Originally, he wanted to fiercely reprimand these daring soldiers, but when he heard the elder's words, he swallowed the words he wanted to say. He wanted to ask what was going on, and whether he had heard wrongly, but then he felt the ground tremble, and then he rushed out of the big tent without caring about anything else. Then, he saw the figures of the 5-star army cavalry in front of him. Using this short period of time, the 1st Cavalry Division that was attacking them was already in front of them, and Timur's troops charging at the front were even fighting with some of the Japanese army's vanguards. Without a unified command, even the arrows that were shot were scattered, and Tian, who led the cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division to the front of the Japanese Empire's military camp without any obstacles, and began their crazy killing journey. As everyone knew, the strongest cavalry in the world was the Mongolian elite cavalry, and their most glorious period was under the leadership of Genghis Khan, when they conquered the world. Compared to the Mongol elite cavalry of that period, the world's #1 cavalry division was not any weaker. Especially since they had the 7-star steel crossbows and high-quality cavalry swords that Yang Chendong personally gave out. Their equipment was even better than the Mongol elite cavalry of that period. Yang Chendong was never stingy with what he could give, and the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division was also constantly charging forward, and if it was a battle of cold weapons, there was no one in the world who could be their opponent. Such an excellent cavalry unit, and they came prepared, their morale was high, and they were full of confidence. On the other hand, the Japanese army was not prepared at all, and the result was already decided when they charged forward. Now, it was just a matter of how long the defending side could defend, and how big the losses were. Tanaka pushed open the curtain of the big tent, and what he saw was the 1st Cavalry Division charging forward, and no one could stop them. He even clearly saw the Japanese army in charge of the security of the perimeter being beheaded by cavalry swords. Chapter 1080. As the blood splattered through the air, Tanaka felt a chill on his neck. It was not that he had never been on the battlefield before. On the contrary, he had killed many people, sometimes in a very cruel way. But when he saw the 1st Cavalry Division killing everywhere, he couldn't help but feel scared. He had a feeling that this was an army that killed people like flies, and that the 50,000 Japanese army he led could not stop them. Retreat, retreat, run. Tanaka finally couldn't suppress the fear in his heart. After shouting these words like a madman, he turned around and ran. The elders and soldiers behind him had to do their best to catch up so that they wouldn't fall behind. The scene of Tanaka running out of the big tent was seen by many soldiers of the Japanese Empire. Limited by their knowledge, these ordinary soldiers, including many who had just joined the army, did not have a deep understanding of the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division. They even arrogantly thought that they had the advantage in numbers. The only thing they lacked was the commander. The general drank too much last night, and no one was commanding them. The moment Tanaka appeared in front of the big tent, these soldiers seemed to have seen hope. Many of them had already clenched the swords in their hands, ready to fight back at any time. But then the general ran away without even leaving a decent sentence, which attracted the attention of the other soldiers. Then, they looked at each other in confusion. They were completely confused by the general's performance. But after a moment of hesitation, many people made a wise choice. The soldiers of the Japanese Empire, who had already picked up their swords and guns, and even put on their armor, quickly scattered and ran away. The general had run away, so what was the point of staying here? Waiting to be killed or taken captive? As long as they weren't stupid, they ran away. At this time, it wasn't about who ran faster, but as long as you ran a little faster than your companions, you might be able to escape from misfortune. An army, no matter how many people there were, and how much combat power they had, the moment their fighting spirit disappeared, they would be like chickens and dogs. There would be no threat at all. This was the case for the 50,000-strong Japanese army. When the 1st Cavalry Division rushed over and swept through the barracks like a gust of wind, what they faced was not the Japanese army that was putting up a desperate resistance. Instead, they were fleeing in all directions like defeated dogs. Division Master, what should we do? First Commander Temu and the other commanders asked Tianhu in unison. Bai Shuang will lead the 4th Regiment and Gong Feng will lead the 5th Regiment to flank the enemy from the left and right. Try to keep as many Japanese army here as possible so that the 1st Reserve Division, abbreviation for the 1st Reserve Division, can get here soon. Capture as many prisoners as possible. The 1st Regiment, 2nd Regiment, and 3rd Regiment will follow me to help the new army. Tianhu only pondered for a few moments before he made his decision. The smoothness of this battle was somewhat beyond his expectations. He still didn't know why the Japanese army was so weak, but when he saw the 1st Division and the other 2 divisions fighting, he knew that the Japanese army wasn't all useless. Perhaps there was something he didn't know about. If he was lucky, then the new army's luck wouldn't be too good. He decided to go over and help. Of course, Tianhu wasn't a god. He still had some selfish motives in his heart. For example, the new army's commander Su he had been secretly competing with him. If there was a chance, Tianhu didn't mind helping him and showing his strength. Tianhu gave the order, and not long after, the army was divided into 3 groups. At this moment, on the battlefield of the new army, the situation was in a stalemate. Unlike Tanaka, Kazumi didn't drink. The command authority and organization of the army were still there. The generals under him were also doing their duties step by step. Although the appearance of the new army was indeed beyond his expectations, after losing about 5,000 troops on the periphery, Kazumi still led the soldiers to block the new army's attack. What's going on? When Commander Su he saw that the front army was not making good progress, his face showed anger. He ordered someone to call the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, who was in charge of the vanguard. The commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division lowered his head. He wanted to explain that the Japanese army's defense was too tenacious. In addition, the ratio of veterans to recruits in the 2nd Cavalry Division was about the same, so they couldn't fully display their strength. This was why they couldn't achieve their military goal. But knowing Su He's temperament, the commander lowered his head and didn't say anything. If they didn't complete the mission, any explanation would be useless. Humph, the 2nd Cavalry Division will be replaced. Commander Ku, you go. After Su he lost his temper, he turned his gaze to the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Ku Lu. No matter what method you use, you must break the enemy's defense in at most 3 hours. Otherwise, you don't have to come back to see me. Yes, Commander. Ku Lu also said with a dignified face, but at the same time, he was also a little excited. The harder the battle on the battlefield, the more it showed the strength and characteristics of an army. In other words, after the challenge, there were also opportunities. The 2nd Cavalry Division was forced to be replaced. The 1st Cavalry Division rushed forward and launched a new round of fierce attacks. Under the leadership of Ku Lu, the Japanese army on the opposite side was put under more pressure. Commander Kazumi couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief when he saw the 5-star army's cavalry retreat like a tide. In his opinion, the other party should have seen his strength and retreated in the face of difficulties. But he didn't expect that soon. A new batch of cavalry began to charge, and this charge brought a lot of pressure to the front line. In less than half an hour, 5 generals had already asked for reinforcements. Seriously speaking, infantry was always at a disadvantage against cavalry. The reason why they were able to resist until now was because the Japanese army had already displayed their samurai spirit. They didn't fear hardship, and they didn't fear death. This was why they were able to resist the charge of the cavalry under such heavy losses. What followed was not small. Just the front line of the army had already been replaced 3 times. The casualties could be said to be extremely heavy. If it wasn't for Kazumi's determination to resist, they would have been defeated like Tanaka. When the 6th general sent someone to ask for reinforcements, Kazumi's face was already very ugly. He looked around and asked, "How many reserve troops do we have now?" Reporting to the commander, "There are still about 20,000. A subordinate quickly reported the answer. When he heard that 50,000 troops were lost so quickly, Kazumi's face showed a surprised expression. The 5-star army really lived up to its reputation. But now wasn't the time to think about these things. He looked at the sky. There was still more than an hour before it would be dark. He gritted his teeth and said, "Send these 20,000 people up. No matter what, we have to hold on until dark. This way, we can retreat under the cover of the poor light." At this time, Kazumi no longer had the intention to compete with the 5-star army. All he thought about was how to safely bring the army out and reduce the losses as much as possible. Without a doubt, the dark would be the best opportunity. At that time, everyone's vision would be poor. It would be the time for him to lead the army out of the battlefield. The Japanese army had increased their troops again. Seeing that the formation of arrows was about to break open a gap in the enemy's defense, more Japanese army rushed up to fill in the gaps. Commander Kuolu had no choice but to give the order to retreat. In this charge, the 1st Cavalry Division lost nearly half of their men. Even if he, the division commander, personally took the role of the tip of the arrow, he only managed to kill a little more than the enemy. He also suffered some minor injuries. The Japanese army had increased their troops again. Commander Suhi saw this. He knew that the 1st Cavalry Division had done their best, so he didn't blame them. He also sent out the 3rd and 4th Cavalry Divisions who hadn't moved yet. Obviously, he also saw that the sky was getting dark. Once night fell, it would be impossible to completely wipe out the enemy. At this point, both sides had placed heavy bets. It was as if they would not stop until they fought to the death and a victor was decided. Because of this, the battlefield became very cruel. The death toll on both sides rose sharply. The ground was littered with corpses, and the pungent smell of blood made it hard for people to breathe. Time passed by slowly. After the Japanese Empire had sent out all 50,000 troops, the effect was very obvious. They used the corpses as stumbling blocks to slow down the new army's advance and speed. This showed the strength of the Japanese army's samurai. If things continued to develop like this, the new army would definitely win in the end. However, it would only be a small victory. After all, when faced with an army of 50,000 people with tenacious fighting spirit, it would be very difficult for anyone to win. Unless they could hit the enemy with a single blow and completely disrupt their fighting spirit. And this possibility soon appeared. When the 1st Cavalry Division finally arrived at the side of the battlefield, Commander Tian gave a command. When 6,000 elite cavalrymen rushed over with their swords, the balance of the battlefield was broken. The sudden appearance of the 1st Cavalry Division was like a sudden appearance. Their appearance was not only beyond the expectations of the One Nation Army, but also beyond the expectations of the new 3rd Army. Why are they here? Could it be that they have already taken care of the enemies on the other side? When Commander Suhi saw Tian leading his troops to attack from the side, a look of shock flashed across his face. Then, he shook his head. He had to admit that the 1st Cavalry Division was worthy of the title of the strongest cavalry. Even if his cavalry division had more than 3 times the number of the enemy, it was still somewhat inferior in terms of fighting strength. Seeing that Tian had personally charged into the battlefield with his swords, Suhi naturally wouldn't fall behind. With a shout, he led the 2nd Cavalry Division, which had rested for nearly 4 hours, to attack. At this point, the new army didn't have any backup plans. All 30,000 cavalrymen were on the battlefield. Chapter 1081. After the new army joined up with the 1st Cavalry Division, they already had more than 40,000 soldiers, and there wasn't much of a gap between them and the 50,000 Japanese army. In addition to the cavalry suppression of the infantry, as well as the heavy casualties of the Japanese army, this attack was completely one-sided. Very quickly, the tip of the arrow's formation pierced through the enemy's defense, and the two sides finally engaged in a chaotic battle, beginning to crush each other. They only relied on their advantage in numbers to form a human shield, blocking the cavalry's charge. But when the two sides had equal military strength, especially with the sudden attack of the 1st Cavalry Division, it was tantamount to completely breaking the previous balance. Although Tianhu's cavalry didn't have many people, their combat power was really amazing. Wherever they passed, not to mention people escaping, they didn't even leave behind many captives, which fully demonstrated their fierce and bloodthirsty side. This was seen by even more Japanese army, and the fighting spirit in their hearts was wiped out. No one knew who took the lead and shouted, "Run!" Then the army's morale collapsed, and the entire front line was disintegrating. No matter how much Kazumi shouted or ordered, it was completely useless. Since Kazumi was shouting so happily, he became Tianhu's target. As the most powerful tip of the arrows, he led an extremely elite team of 30 people to crush all the way. No one was his opponent, and they quickly rushed to a place less than 100 meters away from Kazumi. When they rushed to this place, Tianhu observed from the corner of his eyes that there was another cavalry team rapidly approaching. It was the commander of the new army, Su-he. His eyes flashed with a smile, and then he urged his horse to gallop. Under Su-he's slightly anxious gaze, he crossed the 100 meters distance to Kazumi's side. The commander of the Japanese Empire, who had been defending the position, saw the 5-star army cavalry coming in front of him, but his face was still as calm as water. He calmly pulled out the katana on his body, and made a posture that he was going to fight to the death. Kazumi, who had been practicing martial arts since he was young, had some martial arts. Although his individual combat power was not as good as the ninjas of the Japanese Empire, he was still qualified as a samurai. He was already prepared to cut down the 5-star army cavalry. He wanted to let the 5-star army know that as a commander of the Japanese army, he wasn't worse than anyone else, and he wouldn't allow anyone to have any ideas about him. Dang! Golden sparks flew, which was the golden sparks produced by the heavy force of the cavalry sword and the katana. Under the heavy force of the katana, Kazumi couldn't help but take a few steps back. He didn't expect the strength of the 5-star army cavalry to be so great. His arm was already sore from just one strike. But what he didn't expect was that when Kazumi was still thinking of using the force of his retreat to prepare for the second strike, another cavalry sword appeared in front of him. Then, he felt a pain in his neck, and there was a sweet taste in his throat. His vision began to blur, and his perception began to decline. He struggled with all his strength, and with the last of his strength, he looked down and saw that his chest had already been dyed red with blood. The blood wasn't anyone else's, it was his own. It was the second katana that Tianhu suddenly pulled out and performed a miraculous feat he didn't expect it at all, and with a single strike, he ended his life. Kazumi was dead. Although Tianhu was forced to use the second katana, because the process was too fast, it gave people the feeling that their commander had died tragically on the horse. Seeing this scene, the soldiers of the Japanese Empire, who originally wanted to hold on, turned pale. Without a commander, there was no unified command. Without a commander, it was like a group of dragons without a leader, and their fighting spirit was rapidly fading. Defeat was imminent, and there was no way to reverse the situation. The cavalry of the 5-star army was running all over the battlefield, and around them, more and more Japanese army were kneeling and surrendering. Anyone who wanted to escape by chance was greeted with sharp cavalry swords or arrows from afar. The situation was settled. Nishi Tohide was still waiting in the 5-star army's camp. Ever since he came here to see King Wunan of Daimyong, he was trapped in this military tent. There were people who sent him food and drinks, but no one paid attention to him. When he wanted to go out and say that he wanted to see Bugnam of Gojoseon, there would always be people from the 5-star army in front of him. When they were annoyed by the questions, these soldiers would use Yang Chendong's health as an excuse to delay the meeting. After knowing that Yang Chendong was unwell, Nishi Tohide still hoped that he would die of illness somewhere else, so that the Japanese Empire would have one less strong opponent. But in his heart, he warned himself that this was simply impossible. Not to mention that he had seen Yang Chendong before, he was very young, and his health was very good. As a commander, there must be a lot of people taking care of him. How could he get sick so easily? If he wasn't sick, why didn't Yang Chendong want to see him, and why didn't he talk to him? Could it be, Nishi Tohide was very smart? Because of this, he thought of a terrible result. Could it be that Yang Chendong used the peace talks as bait to numb the army behind him, and then he would take the opportunity to do something? No matter how smart he was, he didn't think that Yang Chendong would launch an all-out attack. After all, both sides had fought for a day or two, and the strength of both sides had long been known during the war. Even if they wanted to launch a surprise attack, at most they would have some advantages in the beginning. Once the Japanese Empire's army reacted, the Five-Star Army would not be able to gain any advantages. They didn't know the real situation of the Five-Star Army at all. The main reason was that Yang Chendong had disguised himself well. For more than a month, he had only sent out the Foreign Alliance Army. No matter how hard the battle was, he didn't send out any elites. Not only that, but he also selected the veterans who had been on the battlefield and withdrew them from the battlefield. This made the Japanese army united, and they all had the idea of looking down on the Five-Star Army. On the battlefield, any idea of looking down on the opponent could very likely lead to a fatal disaster. Unfortunately, everyone knew this, but not many people could easily do it. Nishi Tohide, who had confidence in the Japanese army and looked down on the Five-Star Army, couldn't think of what Yang Chendong was planning. He simply stopped thinking about it and ate, drank, and slept well in the tent. He acted as if he wasn't in a hurry, and the Five-Star Army should be in a hurry. For days later, when Nishi Tohide was still sleeping comfortably in the tent, a few soldiers from the Five-Star Army came and said that the sixth young master wanted to see him. At this time, Nishi Tohide's face showed a trace of pride. What? He couldn't play psychological warfare anymore, and wanted to prepare for peace talks. He was ready to fight for more benefits for the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. That's right. Ning Shidushio regarded the house arrest as Yang Chendong's probing. In his view, it was obvious that he had won. For this reason, when he walked all the way to the main tent, Nishi Tohide's face still had a confident and proud smile. He even imagined the moment when Yang Chendong would admit defeat. But all of this changed when he came outside the main tent and saw Kazumi's head placed outside the tent. He no longer had that smug look on his face. Instead, he broke out in a cold sweat. Ningshi Dushio was already inexplicably shocked. He really couldn't figure out why General Kazumi's head would appear here. Wasn't he defending the front line of Changmen Prefecture with 50,000 Japanese troops? On his side, there was another 50,000 Japanese army led by Wadamura. With these 100,000 people forming a strong line of defense, how could they die here? His face was full of confusion, but his whole body was already covered in cold sweat. When he entered the main tent and saw the sand table in front of him, he noticed that most of the Changmen Prefecture's territory had been planted with red flags. The fear in his heart was even more serious. You killed General Kazumi? Under nervousness, Nishi Tohide no longer had the confident look he had when he was holding the Pearl of Wisdom. He said with a frightened expression. Sitting above the main tent, Yang Chendong's face was like spring. Facing Nishi Tohide's question, he didn't immediately answer. Instead, he looked at the petite Junko and smiled. Junko seemed to have received some kind of hint. First, she smiled at Yang Chendong, then looked at Nishi Tohide, who entered the tent, and said, "Yes, he is dead. He dared to disobey the emperor's order and helped Ashikaga Yoshimasa. This is what they deserve." As the former princess of the Japanese Empire, Junko hated Ashikaga Yoshimasa, including those who followed the general. In her heart, she hoped that these people would be buried with her father. Kazumi's death was just the beginning. Junko said this with anger, which made Nishi Tohide's face become even uglier. He saw Junko's anger and knew that this was the result of her emotions. Whether it was out of self-esteem or because of his long-standing patriarchal mentality, he decided not to argue with Junko even though she was a princess. Instead, he looked at Yang Chendong and asked, "Bugnam of Gojoseon, aren't we negotiating? Did you just kill our people like this? This is not good." Nishi Tohide originally wanted to reprimand Yang Chendong verbally, but considering that he was in the enemy's tent, if his words were too harsh and angered Yang Chendong, he was afraid that the next result would be the same as Kazumi's. Being wronged and unable to speak out, this was the so-called diplomacy of a weak country. Junko didn't care about Ningxi Duoxiu's feelings. From the moment she tried to kill her mother and killed her father and brother, she was already at odds with these military clans of the Neon country. Now that she was Yang Chendong's wife, both in her heart and in her body, her mentality had changed. Everything was for Yang Chendong's benefit. As for these former compatriots, she didn't care whether they lived or died. Junko didn't care, but Yang Chendong couldn't. He was very clear that although this battle was won, the military strength of the Japanese Empire was still there. The combined strength of the army and navy was still several times his own. If he continued to choose to fight with force, even if there was a day when he could defeat the enemy, he was afraid that he would have to pay a heavy price. Chapter 1082. None of this was what Yang Chendong wanted. What he wanted was to take over the entire Japanese empire without breaking any bones. In order to achieve this goal, he knew very well when to be tough and when to back down. Now that he had opened the door, it was time for others to perform. Now, he had to think about how to preserve his strength in the coming chaos. And in order to do this, the first step was to convince Nishi Toshiru. No one said that we can't fight during peace talks, not to mention that we haven't reached any agreement yet. So, you don't have to feel wronged on this point. Yang Chendong said with a lofty look. Although he was already prepared to back down, in terms of momentum, before he achieved his goal, he still had to pretend that he was in the right and that he was not going to let go. Yang Chendong's words were like a heavy hammer hitting Nishi Toshiru's chest, making him a little breathless. But as a smart person, and even the think tank that Ashikaga Yoshimasa relied on, he quickly heard the difference in Yang Chendong's words. The biggest difference between a smart person and a stupid person was that they could turn bad things in a direction that was beneficial to them. Those who did it well were smart, and those who didn't did it well were stupid. Bugnam of Gojoseon, are you saying that as long as we reach an agreement, you won't fight with us anymore? Yang Chendong was a little surprised that Nishi Toshiru caught the meaning of his words so quickly. But this was good, as it would save him a lot of effort. He nodded and said, yes, our 5-star army is also peace-loving. We have always had a friendly relationship with the Japanese Empire. This time, if you didn't attack my wife's family, do you think we would be willing to come all the way here to fight this war? Yang Chendong admitted it, which made Nishi Toshiru see new hope. He immediately said, yes, we acted recklessly before. I also sincerely apologize to Princess Junko for the death of the Emperor and Empress, and I am willing to compensate her. I just hope that Bugnam of Gojoseon will stop the war for the sake of the people who are suffering because of it. For this, you can make any request. Nishi Toshiru's meaning was very clear. He was willing to compensate Yang Chendong, and he was even willing to make great concessions. He just wanted Yang Chendong to stop the advance of the 5-star army in exchange for a temporary peace in the Japanese Empire. Of course, it was also to free up the hands of Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa to deal with all the opponents who jumped out, and to buy time for the reunification of the Japanese Empire. How could such a small idea be hidden from Yang Chendong? But this was exactly what he needed, so he nodded as if he didn't see anything. Well, seeing that you are so sincere, this king can consider it. No. Just as Yang Chendong finished speaking, Junko loudly objected, they killed my father emperor, my mother empress, and my brother. We can't let them go so easily. I want all the killers to pay with their lives. When Junko shouted like this, Nishi Toshiru's face became bitter. Originally, he thought that things had taken a turn for the better, but if Princess Junko objected, it was really hard to say how things would develop. Well, women shouldn't interrupt when men are talking. Yang Chendong suddenly spoke. He changed his previous understanding look and said very seriously like a male chauvinist. It was as if he didn't know Yang Chendong. Junko widened her eyes and looked at her husband in disbelief. Was this still the teacher she admired the most from the bottom of her heart? Was this still the 6th young master who gave her the feeling of a gentleman and was the most considerate person? Was this still the king who she was willing to give up everything, including her body? At this moment, Junko's face was constantly changing. Did she think that she was deceived? Did she think that after her family left, she had found a home and a backer in her life? Did she think that this man who she had always had a good impression of and trusted the most would definitely avenge her? But everything that happened now clearly told her that all of this was impossible. The other party was still a person who put benefits first, a person who was cold and ruthless to achieve his goals. Did he just want to deceive her into writing the document to announce to the world? Did he just want to deceive her feelings and body? Junko still looked at Yang Chendong with a look of astonishment, and even the tears in the corners of her eyes couldn't stop flowing out. Those were tears of sadness, tears of regret. This scene stunned Ningxi Duoxiu, who was at the side. But what was even more surprising was that Yang Chendong turned a blind eye to all of this and said to the people outside the tent, "Come, send the 8th madam back to rest." Immediately, Beta Persei came in with Tu Longwei and politely asked Junko to leave. Junko didn't refuse. She knew that once Yang Chendong gave the order, everything she did would be in vain, so she was very cooperative. But when she left, she fiercely stared at Yang Chendong, as if everyone's hatred was undoubtedly expressed in this one glance. After Junko left, the big tent became quiet again. Yang Chendong looked at Ningxi Duoxiu, who was still in a daze, and said, "What's wrong? Don't you want to continue the negotiation?" "Yes, yes." Ningxi Duoxiu seemed to have just recovered, and took the initiative to say with some enthusiasm. Junko was escorted back to her tent, and then lay on the bed and cried bitterly. She once thought that even if her parents and brother left her, she would not be lonely, because there was a man who would take care of her, cherish her, and protect her. But all of this was destroyed because of what happened just now. She felt like she had just met Yang Chendong, and regretted it. At the same time, she secretly hated herself for being so stupid. She didn't even know that she had become a chess piece in his hands. She cried bitterly, and even when the maid Miko and the guard Xiaolin appeared, they were driven out by her. Now she just wanted to cry alone. She cried for more than half an hour, and then under extreme mental exhaustion, she fell asleep. She didn't know how much time had passed, until she felt a warm body on the cold bed. She habitually leaned over, looking for the chest that she thought was the most solid in her heart. But when she just leaned against the warm chest, Junko suddenly thought of something, and suddenly opened her eyes. When she saw that it was indeed her husband, Yang Chendong, lying beside her, she didn't know where she got the strength and courage, but she struggled to get up, and broke free from the restraint of Yang Chendong's right arm. "Lie down." Feeling that Junko was really resisting, Yang Chendong suddenly said, and at the same time, increased the strength of his arm, and pressed Junko to his side again. Junko gasped for breath, feeling that Yang Chendong was angry, but she wasn't afraid, because she could no longer see the hope of life, and she had already decided to die. Since that was the case, what was there to be afraid of? At most, she would die. "Let go of me. You liar." While struggling with all his might, he continued to shout. It was clear that he was not going to give in no matter what. "How did I lie to you?" A gentle voice suddenly sounded in her ear. Then Yang Chendong's arms exerted a little force, and completely controlled Junko, making her unable to move. His voice sounded again, "I remember that in class, sometimes we shouldn't believe our eyes and ears, because what they represent may not be the most true side. Do you still remember?" Junko was stunned by this sentence. What kind of situation was this? Why was he still thinking of teaching her? Did he really think that she was a fool? A naive girl who was deceived but still obedient. She wanted to continue resisting, but then Yang Chendong's voice sounded in her ear again. "Give me half a quarter of an hour to explain. If you still want me to leave after hearing what I have to say, I will agree. How about it?" The magnetic voice sounded, and it was particularly pleasant to hear. For some reason, Junko became quiet. Maybe she didn't believe that Yang Chendong would deceive her, and she always wanted an explanation. Junko became obedient, and Yang Chendong's voice sounded in her ear. In just a moment, Junko's face began to change. First it was surprise, then it was surprise, and finally it became surprise. After Yang Chendong finished, Junko hurriedly said, "You mean, everything before was just an act, just to make Ningxi Doxiu and Ashikage Yoshimasa behind her lower their guard?" Yes. Yang Chendong nodded. Just now, he was explaining this matter to Junko. He was making Ningxi Doxiu lower her guard, because he knew that she was very smart, and it was not easy to make her fall into his trap, so he came up with such a trick. Sure enough, Junko cooperated very well. Because the act was enough, the following negotiation was very smooth. At this moment, Ningxi Doxiu had reached a consensus with Yang Chendong and left the 5-star army's camp. Junko, who finally knew everything, had forgiven Yang Chendong in her heart, but on the surface, she still pretended to be angry and said, "If that's the case, why didn't you tell me in advance, so that I could be prepared? If you told me in advance, would you still be able to perform so perfectly? Would you still be able to deceive Ningxi Doxiu?" Yang Chendong asked. This time, Junko didn't speak. Indeed, if she knew everything in advance, she wouldn't be able to perform so well. If she couldn't even deceive herself, how could she deceive others? Wouldn't that delay Yang Chendong's plan? Chapter 1083. Seeing the understanding look on Junko's face, Yang Chendong chuckled. "Well, don't be angry. I didn't have a choice just now. Besides, Nishi Toshihita has promised that it won't take long for him to be sent to the camp. At that time, he will be handed over to you. You can deal with him however you want, okay?" Yang Chendong took the initiative to explain, apologize, and reason. He showed his sincerity. With his current status, it was very difficult for him to say these things. Junko knew that going too far was as bad as falling short. She smiled and said, "Well, since you are so sincere, then I will forgive you." "Ah. It's just forgiveness. After I do this, it's equivalent to avenging you. Shouldn't there be a reward?" Yang Chendong smiled and said. His big hand had already moved on Junko's body. With a cry of surprise, Junko soon started to pant. The entire garden was intoxicating. After Nishi Toshihita left the 5-star army's camp, he rushed all the way to the Onion district, appeared in the main tent of the Japanese Empire's camp, and appeared in front of Supreme General Ashikage Yoshimasa. He rushed back, even rushed day and night, just to tell the Supreme General the conditions that he and Yang Chendong agreed. The army couldn't be the enemy of the 5-star army. It was too dangerous and full of too many unknowns. Ninji Dosu rushed back. Ashikaga Yoshimasa received him in the main tent, but his face was dark the whole time. He looked very unhappy. It was no wonder. Previously, he sent this person over to stop the war. As a result, he lost nearly 100,000 troops and lost his territory in Changmen Prefecture. How could he not be angry? All of this was because he trusted Ningxi Doxiu too much. Now that the main character was here, it was time to settle the score. "Supreme General, good news, good news." Ninhei Dosa knew that the army had suffered a great loss because of him, so when the two sides met, he called out to Ashikage Yoshimasa in order to give himself a chance to speak. Otherwise, based on his understanding of Ashikage Yoshimasa would probably push him out of the tent and behead him. This was very useful, at least it made Ashikage Yoshimasa interested. "Good news? What good news?" Since the Supreme General asked, Nishi Toshihita finally had the opportunity to speak. He immediately told the process and the result of his negotiation with Yang Chendong. This talk took a long time, and Ashikage Yoshimasa frowned and narrowed his eyes. Finally, when Nishi Toshihita finished, Ashikage Yoshimasa also asked, "You said that you have negotiated with Bugnam of Gojoseon to give the other party the entire Shanyang-dao region, and the other party has promised that they will not be enemies with us, right?" "Yes, Bugnam of Gojoseon said so. In order to ensure that there will be no problems, I also drafted an agreement with Bugnam of Gojoseon's name and seal as proof." Nishi Toshihide took out a document and handed it to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. On the document, Yang Chendong's name and seal were indeed on it, and it also recorded the results of the negotiation. For example, as long as the Five-Star Army has occupied the West Sea Province and the Shanyang-Dao region, then they can make a guarantee and promise to coexist peacefully with the Supreme General. Unless the other party takes the initiative to send troops to attack them, otherwise, this agreement will be valid for a long time. Taking out two regions in one go was equivalent to publicly admitting that they belonged to the Five-Star Army. This was no different from betraying the country. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was a little hesitant. He was considering the consequences of doing this. Seeing Ashikaga Yoshimasa's hesitation, Nishi Toshihide was afraid that he would not agree in a fit of anger, so he hurriedly said, "Supreme General, although it seems that we have suffered some losses, you can deal with the Five-Star Army. But without the Five-Star Army as a major enemy, you can free yourself to deal with the other opposing forces. As long as you annihilate all those people and take their forces as your own, you will control the 5 major regions. At that time, you won't have any worries. Wouldn't it be easy to deal with the Five-Star Army? In the end, this is still our Japanese Empire's territory." In the words of the Han people, even a strong dragon cannot suppress a local snake. Nishi Toshihide had a good plan. From the beginning to the end, he did not have any intention of giving in to the Five-Star Army. Everything was just a temporary measure. He only wanted to buy time to stabilize the rear and increase his strength. This was also why he dared to agree to this agreement and personally appeared in front of Ashikaga Yoshimasa to persuade him. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's days were not easy at all. Ever since the death of the emperor, he knew that there was going to be a storm. Otherwise, why didn't he take the initiative to kill his way into the palace and destroy the royal family? Why did he allow them to be high and mighty? At the very least, that was the impression he gave to outsiders. Kuki Kiyoshi had killed the emperor's entire family without any warning. This had indeed brought him a lot of trouble. Fortunately, the Japanese Empire was currently in a period of chaos. This was where his hope lay. There shouldn't be many people paying attention to the royal family. However, Princess Junko's announcement to the world changed everything. For a time, his forces became an existence that everyone wanted to kill. It seemed that if one wanted to become the legitimate force, they only needed to scold them and send troops to fight them to prove that they were legitimate. Because of this, not only were the troops temporarily unable to be recruited in time, but the Five-Star Army was also suddenly pressing on the front. With an interception in front and a pursuit behind, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was already in a dangerous situation. If the Five-Star Army suddenly stopped attacking, this would undoubtedly give him a chance to catch his breath. With enough time, he would be able to get rid of those people who wanted to beat him while he was down. Ning Shidoxiu saw this and agreed to Yang Chendong's request without asking for permission. He also believed that as long as Ashikaga Yoshimasa wasn't stupid, he would definitely make the wisest and smartest choice. To be able to become a great general, not only was he brave, but Ashikaga Yoshimasa was also a very smart person. He only hesitated for a moment before nodding heavily. "Fine, let's give the Sanyang path to the Five-Star Army first. However, I will soon let them know that eating this great general's food is not that easy to swallow." Ashikaga Yoshimasa agreed and then issued a few orders. The 400,000 Japanese Empire troops stationed in the Sanyang path began to retreat. After leaving the Sanyang path, they didn't return to Ping and Beijing. Instead, they went straight to the Hokuriku, Tokai, and Shanin paths. There were already many warlords of the Japanese Empire there who wanted to take advantage of the chaos. Now was the time to deal with them. The Japanese army withdrew and gave up the entire Sanyang path. Yang Chendong, who was already prepared, immediately gave an order. Then, the Five-Star Army quickly moved forward and occupied the empty area that was not guarded by any army. Considering that they left in a hurry, most of the 2 million people of the Japanese Empire in the Sanyang path didn't leave. Faced with such a large number of people, Yang Chendong immediately ordered them to board the transport ships and move them away. Yang Chendong never had a good impression of the Japanese Empire, so he didn't have much feelings for the people here. In order to complete this task, he also authorized the division commanders under him to threaten the people of the Japanese Empire if they resisted and refused to leave with the ships. However, it was best not to kill them. Of course, if they encountered people who were very cooperative, they had to deal with them with a smile. After all, these people would become Yang Xie's people in the future. Just as Yang Chendong expected, during the migration process, they did encounter some resistance from the people of the Japanese Empire. They used the reason that they had lived here for generations and refused to obey the orders of the 5-star army. There were even some people who wanted to take advantage of the fact that there were many people around them and scolded the 5-star army. There were even some who directly threatened to attack them. Towards these people, the soldiers of the 5-star army who had already received orders didn't show any mercy. Those who scolded him were given a few punches and slaps to teach him a lesson. Those who threatened him with force were given a round of beatings, causing him to be seriously injured. According to Yang Chendong, other than not taking their lives, he had done everything he could to beat and scold them. For this matter, the 5-star army also prepared for a large-scale cleanup if the local people resisted. For this reason, the matter was also reported to Yang Chendong. If something unexpected happened, he would order the encirclement and suppression order. In response to this request, Yang Chendong smiled and didn't sign it. Instead, he confidently said to Beta Persei who sent the letter, "Don't worry, these people won't dare to do anything. As long as we show enough strength, they will definitely be more obedient than anyone else." Yang Chendong was used to the development and current situation of the Japanese Empire in later generations, so he naturally understood them very well. So when this order was issued to the army, some people thought that the 6th young master was too confident. Seeing that they were about to leave their homeland where they had lived for many years, how many people would be willing to obey? Regardless of whether the people below had doubts or not, the truth was the most real thing. When the 5-star army showed their fists, the people of the Japanese Empire really became a lot more obedient. Those who took the initiative to jump out and wanted to use the fact that there were many people around them to cause trouble discovered that when the 5-star army really did not hold back, their fellow countrymen and even their neighbors chose to stand by and watch. They chose to ignore it and stay out of it. This was naturally related to the national characteristics of the Japanese Empire. This was a nation that advocated the strong and powerful. Just like in later generations, when the Americans threw out 2 bombs, they, who were originally arrogant, became obedient. Later, when the Americans stationed troops on their island and repeatedly did some things that angered the heavens, nothing happened. In this regard, Wuxia's performance was much better than the Japanese Empire. In the face of the invasion and even domination by foreign races, they had been constantly resisting. Even if they knew that the hope was very small, there were still people who did it. Just like when the Ming dynasty was destroyed and the Qing dynasty was established, the so-called third prince of the Ming dynasty also lasted for hundreds of years and resisted for hundreds of years. You're tuning in to the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.